Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoy video. We're finally back. It's been a minute. We've had the transition of getting out of the summer. I guess technically it's still summer, but kind of migrating from vacation mode, and which for me was actually moving a whole bunch of stuff because I had to prepare my mom to move, and then I moved myself, so it's been a bit crazy. And then I've got a new function at my job, so been a little bit nuts. And I think Jonas has also been quite busy, so we haven't gotten as many videos out as we would have liked. But something that was definitely actually, as I was flying to Atlanta, Douwe, I was actually prepping for this already then, and so now it's been probably a month and a half, 2 months since I left, and we finally made it happen. I've got my buddy from the Dutch competitive scene here. He's also been the coach. He'll be the coach for the Dutch Worlds team this coming year, and he's been it in the past as well. Douwe Klomp, how's it going, man? How are you doing?
Hey Ryan, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm doing really great, and it's really good to be on here, and feeling honored that you invited me over.
Of course. Yeah, one of the things that I've always felt a kinship with you in particular is that I feel like, we've got the Johnny Spikes and Timmys of the world. I think you're probably familiar with those terms.
Not
Oh,
really.
okay. It comes from the Magic the Gathering world, from the design space there. But essentially, a spike is someone who's more kind of built for winning, and winning at all costs isn't exactly the best description. But they usually would play, let's say in Warhammer terms, they'd play a list because it's the good one, right? It's the most efficient, it's the smartest choice, it's the most reliable, it most likely will end up winning. On the kind of other side of the spectrum is a Timmy. A Timmy is someone who mainly cares about just having kind of a good time and getting to play with their toys. So there's someone who's probably going to be more inclined to play a meme list as long as it delivers that, kind of value for them. And then kind of in between, it's more of a triangle than it is a spectrum, but kind of in between you've got the Johnnies. And the Johnnies usually derive their enjoyment of a game out of how much creativity they get to express when they're creating lists, when they're playing the game. They often lean into techie aspects, sometimes combos that don't go off every single time, but when they do go off, they get to prove that their crazy inventions actually do work after all. And so anyway, I've always thought of myself mostly as a Johnny player, and you were probably the number one person in our scene that I also think of as a Johnny. Not that you don't want, not that you don't want to win, and not that you don't want to play with your memes and have a good time. Everyone's got a little bit of everything in them. But does that description seem to fit how you see yourself in the gaming space, or am I totally off here?
Well, yeah, I think you're quite right in that, yeah, because it's not like that I want to win hard by playing a meta list, or that I just want to do full memes. But yeah, with this kind of crazy creativity, and yeah, I like to have an underdog kind of list with some special stuff in it that requires some trial and errors, and has some gimmicky stuff in them. But yeah, could be potentially better than the meta. Just do it different than the rest, but not worse.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so like we are both Skaven guys. Not that you only play Skaven, you play a lot of armies, but that's one of the ways that you can quickly tell if someone's a Johnny player, is how much they're okay with the crazy machinations of a Skaven type army. Whereas someone who's really trying to win all the time probably would think it's a little unreliable. I've known some Spike type players, the more meta oriented players, who said that we're about to talk about Bellicor, who said that Bellicor's 3+ ability, because it's changed now, spoiler alert for people that don't know, but it used to kind of be for like the whole phase or the whole turn or whatever it was. And so it was kind of all or nothing, and he was not okay with that it was on a 3-up. That you could take Bellicor, you would choose to shut off opponent units' abilities, and then they'd roll a 3-up at the beginning of a phase, and if they passed that, or whatever failed it, or whatever the roll was, then his Bellicor ability felt like it didn't do what it was supposed to do. And that, I think, for a certain type of spike is just too much risk. 1/3 of the time you don't get what you wanted. Now it's become a little bit more micromanageable. We'll talk about it later. But spoiler alert: all three of the lists that we have that we're going to be showing you guys today have Bellicor in them. So that's pretty exciting too. I don't know. Does that description of Bellicor ring true with you at all, Douwe? Like, do you think there's some players that would absolutely not take a Bellicor just because it's too unreliable?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not only talking about the 3-up ability, but also with the strike first in the enemy combat phase on the 4-up. It's really risky, and you can have really fun plays to taunt and bait the opponent. But yeah, you have to roll your 4-up, which is really a gamble. But if it works, yeah, then most of the time you've got a game.
Yeah, and that's a new ability, right? That's on his new Index War Scroll, and not on the last edition and the latest iteration in third edition. Or was that there as well? I can't remember.
No, it's new.
Yeah,
it's a
okay,
brand
cool.
new rule.
Cool. So for anyone that hasn't been following along, I kind of go into these. So we talked about it, but we treat these like, I guess it's not a Battletome review, it's an index review, but we treat these not only in a manner that's kind of supposed to be evergreen, where they're supposed to be able to be resources that we can keep coming back to, but also I try to put them out there for people that don't know much about the factions. So we're going to go through all the faction details. In fact, I should just go on to the next slide. We're going to take a look at the battle traits and then all the enhancements, and then do a bit of a War Scroll breakdown with some top War Scrolls that we've got. Then we're going to look at 3 army lists today, 1 extra because Douwe's first list was so simple that I'm sure it's complicated to play, but the list itself was so simple that I was like, screw it, let's put a 3rd one in there, and then we'll kind of have some concluding thoughts. Douwe, maybe something that's worth talking about right now is that I asked you to do this video back when we didn't know. Okay, I'm pretty disappointed with the roadmap that we just got from the Nova Open, but I will say that the only piece of information that we got that's really hard definitive is that the 3rd Battletome is going to be slaves. And so now it's kind of a question of, is it even worth going through all this information? How much is going to change, say, from the Skaven Index, and we're about to have pre-order for the Skaven Battletome at time of recording. How much is going to change? Now, they said not a whole lot's going to change except the new units that are coming in, maybe some points changes, who knows. But what are you expecting? Do you feel like we're doing this prematurely and then everything's going to change? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, knowing GW a bit, everything they do, same with when new editions come, and if you look at the last Battletomes drop before a new edition drops, the Battletome is already built for the new edition in most cases. Same what was the case with Idonev or Luminev back in the day. So I think that what we currently have now will be still like for 90% intact. And I think some of the units or sub-factions or the battle formations that feel a bit off, that they will be handled in the Battletome.
Sure. So I guess that means we'll have a follow-up. I don't know if we'll do a full Battletome review. We'll probably just reference this if this ends up holding to be true, what you just said. And then we'll have you on to kind of talk about an update if you like that. And we could talk about some new War Scrolls that we didn't cover the first time. So kind of have part 1, part 2. Maybe that sounds like a good deal. Of course, knowing our schedules, we'll have to plan it a couple months in advance, but we'll get it figured out. All right, so let's move on to the battle traits. So I'm going to be kind of leading this and then asking you what your opinion is on it. And we're going to kind of go through the logical order of how we look at the rules here. So I've got the traits up on the table here, and with these indexes, it's nice. We can see the whole thing right off the top. I'm going to go ahead and look at Eye of the Gods. So this is a once per turn, end of any turn. So that would be your opponent's turn. And remember, you don't have to activate any single ability unless it says you must activate this ability. So technically, you don't have to trigger this, but this would go off at the end of 10 turns in total in a full game. What happens is each friendly Slaves to Darkness unit that destroyed an enemy unit this turn is a target. So when it says once per turn, you might be thinking, oh, that's only for 1 unit. But we see this sometimes in the new 4th edition parlance, is that it'll be a once a turn ability, but that's just a technicality. It means it's happening for literally everything that it's eligible for. Now, the next point actually comes to the eligibility point. It says friendly beasts and non-hero monsters cannot be targeted. So before we even talk about the ability, I've already made a little list here that pops up on the screen of what the units that they're talking about here that don't qualify. So this is, I think I've got this right. Douwe, if I missed something, let me know, but I think I've got the full list. So the list of beasts and non-hero monsters are the Chaos Spawn, Dark Oath Wilderfiend, the Fulmoroid Crusher, the Mindstealer Sphinx, Mutilith Vortex Beast, Raptorix, Slaughter Brute, and the Soul Grinder. Now, if first off, is that list correct? Can you think of anything that is a non-hero monster or a friendly beast that I'm missing?
No, I think you've quite got it.
Okay. And then second point is, the reality is most of these units aren't that great, and they really haven't been. The Wilder Fiend, I think, has some play in a Dark Oath list. The Chaos Spawn is not what he is in a Zinch list. The Crusher and Mindstealer Spherings just aren't, I think the Mindstealer Spherings had a moment in history where it was actually kind of useful, but I don't know if I would say that's quite true anymore. The Vortex Beast is better in a Zinch list, and you can't take him in Zinch anymore. You had a list with some Raptorics, I think you sent me at one point, so maybe there's some play there. But the Slaughter Brute and Soul Grinder, maybe the Slaughter Brute's okay, but the Soul Grinder is way overcosted for what it does and always has been because it's basically on loan from 40K. So I don't feel like this is actually that big of a restrictions list. Is there anything on here that you feel like it really should have been able to get the Eye of the Gods ability before we talk about what those are?
I think like these units, even if they would be eligible, it doesn't really make a lot of sense or help them in a way. So it's not something that really restricts us in our list building or in our play.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to the actual rule. So for the rest of the units in the army, that's all of them, make a reward roll of a d6 for each target and apply the corresponding effect below. There are 6 effects, all right? Now, if you don't like the one you get, you can re-roll the reward roll for the target, but if you do so and you get a 1, it suffers D3 mortal damage. First off, let's just talk about that. Douwe, I feel like that's a pretty good deal, because what this used to be in the past, you could turn into a spawn, and you had no control over whether you get to re-roll it or not. Or how do you feel about this?
Well, this is definitely really good, and yeah, we're gonna deep dive, of course, into what these bonuses and buffs are. But this is really major, and something to take in account, like when playing as well, or as to if you want to make most use of it, you really have to like calculate if you want to kill multiple units with a unit or not, or keep killing a unit each turn to maximize these buffs. They're really good.
Yeah. So how many you've played? You just played in a one-day tournament with this, where you've been prepping some games for our team's tournament we're going to be doing at the end of the month. How often has this gone off on you that you first off needed to re-roll it, and second off that it did a D3 mortal damage to you? How often are you seeing that happen in a given game?
Well, I think I re-rolled it like 2/3, or maybe like for 2/3 or more of the time. And yeah, maybe one or twice rolled one on them. It's like you want to have certain buffs, and if you're going to deep dive like the 6, you can pick any other effect. So you really want to go for those 6s so you can pick the effect you really want. And yeah, if you re-roll and it turns into a 1, that's most of the time not really a big deal, because the first effect you got didn't really make any difference or sense at all.
Okay. Yeah, so, and I'm going to skip ahead to the end real quick, and that says the same effect can be applied multiple times to a unit, and more than one effect can apply to a unit at the same time. So when we talk about each ability, we'll talk about whether that actually makes sense, okay? But it's worth pointing out, what you just said about a 6 is, if, let's say you're shooting for number 5, which might be the best, to add 1 Rin to target's melee weapons for the rest of the battle. If that's what you really wanted to see, then you actually have a 1 out of 3 chance of getting it, because all you got to do is roll a 5, of course, or a 6, and you can just pick it, right? So if you have an ability in mind, there's actually, it's like rolling a 5 up on a d6 that you're going to get the exact one you want, right? And then that's not even taking into account the reroll. If we did the math on that, then there's another chance that you get at that. And it actually is pretty good that you're going to get your ability. But let's go through them. So 1 is nothing, and it doesn't do mortal damage, of course, except, of course, if you re-roll it. 2, mutative regrowth is healing 3 to the target. Now, this is probably great, great to have if you keep taking damage, right? So when I was talking about the same effect being applied multiple times, obviously being applied when you're healthy doesn't it doesn't add any value. But obviously, if you've got a unit that's sitting in combat and is having a hard time healing because they can't rally because they need to be in combat, obviously it can't bring models back. So if it only has a health characteristic of 1, that's not doing anything. So how good is this one? Obviously, it's the lowest effect that actually does something. How good is the healing?
Well, it's if you look at a bit more late game-ish, then it's really good. You always want another effect, but if you're stuck in combat, for instance, with Chaos Knights or with the Vanguard or even with the Be'lakor, and all models have taken some damage, all units had some damage, then healing 3 is always good, helps. It's not bad.
Yeah. Okay. So number 3 is Unnatural Grace. Add 1 to hit rolls for the target's combat attacks for the rest of the army. Now, or for the rest of the battle. I should point out that this army is just not a shooting army. I'm actually prepping a video right now, a series actually, to talk about the shooting in 4th edition in general. But this is one of the armies that has the least amount of shooting. So it says combat, but it might as well just say to their attacks, because the vast majority of units don't have shooting in profiles, or they're not even worth talking about. Adding 1 to hit rolls, of course, is something you can get out of an all-out of attack and sometimes some other abilities. It's also worth pointing out at this point that they implicitly do not impact the companion weapons. So if you're running a Vanguard list, like Douwe is a big fan of, if you got this Eye of the Gods ability off, it would not impact the steeds. It would only impact the riders. So don't get too excited about that. Like, what's it called? Archeon's mount is not getting to benefit from this. But adding +1 to hit rolls is, of course, fantastic, and it saves you from having to blow a CP on something or let you spend it somewhere else, unless, again, you need that mount to also get the +1 to hit. What are you thinking, Douwe? How's this one been for you in the games?
Like you said, it saves you a CP to use an all-out attack somewhere else, or even because you only have 4 CP a battle round in this edition. To do an all-out defense while also still having somewhat of an all-out attack-ish. So it really helps with improving the output of most units.
Yeah.
So it's really good to trigger one time. Not multiple times.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good point. If it does stack, at least it's ignoring a point, right? So technically it does stack, and if someone's got a debuff, or say that you... I was going to say covering fire, but again, this doesn't apply to shooting attacks. But, I mean, is that something you would accept? I mean, are there enough -1s to hit in the game that you feel like stacking 2 of these would be something you wouldn't be disappointed with?
I'd rather not stack it because there are other better options. If you look at the next 2, those are always better than stacking for the what is it to minimize the debuff.
Right. Yeah. To ignore a point of -1. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at number 4. So the target has a ward of 6+ for the rest of the battle. If the target already has a 6+ ward, it has a 5+ instead. So I wanted to make a list. I was running out of time, but I wanted to make a list of all the units that implicitly already have a 6+ ward on them. Maybe off the top of your head, you can list a couple of the most notable units, like who's got a 6+, who's got a 5+ already. Does anyone already have a 5+? Let's start there.
Like an Archeon as a 5-up.
Okay, so this is doing nothing for Archeon then.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like, say the Demon Prince has a 6-up native, so that means you can buff it 1 time and it goes up to a 5-up. And of course, if someone has no ward save, it gets it, and then the second time it would bump up to a 5. How often are you seeing this happen? Obviously, this is like the Vanguard, Chaos Knights, Chaos Warriors of the world lost their Mortal Wounds ward save that they used to have. Is this something that you're desperately wanting to put back on that unit? Do you feel, because mortal damage is kind of not as common anymore in the game in 4th edition from my experience thus far. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, likely the same, because I first thought like losing the 4-up model damage ward will be of great impact, and the Vanguards and the Chaos Knights would drop that everywhere. But like you said, it's much more uncommon to have mortal damage now. The ward, it kind of helps, but it's not. Yeah, it's not like you need it.
Okay, I mean, so if you were choosing this one, would you take a unit and pop it up to 5 if you could? I mean, is there any chance where any version of the reality where you would, if you rolled a 6 on the Eye of the Gods, you would bump this up to a 6 or a 5 or something?
On the Bellacore.
Okay, sure.
Bellacore has a 4 plus normal save, which can't be affected positive or negatively,
Yeah.
which means that by a load of or weight of dice, yeah, he gets damaged real quick, and when with only a 6 of ward, he dies pretty easily. So if you can buff it to a 5 up, then because Bellacore is a support piece, he can keep doing his support stuff.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so the fifth point, and I think it's probably the strongest for most of the people who are, kind of battle lusty out there, it's adding a point of rend to your melee weapons. Again, we said not for shooting, but that doesn't really matter. Adding rend is just fantastic, especially in an edition that's not as save stacky as it used to be. Take it away, Douwe. What are you thinking about this? And this stacks. I mean, obviously, this is one of the only ones that could unlimitedly stack. What are you thinking about it?
Yeah, this is great. This is really this has given me a lot of games because looking at the Vanguard unit, which has rend 2 now, even on the charge, used to be that you got another rend when you charged in third edition. So now you're stuck at 2 rend, and if you're going against like a Stormcast or other armies which have a 3+ save, which is much more common now, it doesn't necessarily mean your attacks would go through, even though you deal 3 damage on the charge or 2 normally. So stacking the rend really has a lot of impact, and if you play it with some calculations, you can get your Vanguard, for instance, to rend -5 or -4, and then even a 3-up save with an all defense can't do much against it.
Okay. Yeah, totally fair. I mean, all out defense costs you a CP, and I'm always hesitant. Like, I'm still learning. I think I've got about 17 games under my belt at this point, maybe 18. And at this point, I'm still feeling like I'm not using CPs correctly. I'm always like, shit, I wish I had a power through. I wish, I wish I had that one last thing I could do. And then that all-out defense is costing you, And so if you can get that rend up there, you're really kind of maybe even helping the person out with their CP use. They're like, well, screw it. It's not going to do anything anyway. But yeah. So I want to come back to one last point about Eye of the Gods that we kind of skimmed over is how it triggers. And so it's when you destroy an enemy unit. Now, let's say you're in a mirror match against a unit of 6 Vanguard. Like 2 blocks of 6 Vanguard. You're not going to be destroying units left and right. You're going to maybe destroy 1 per game, right? And this ability used to trigger also on stealing an objective, which it no longer does. So remind me, I know the Demon Prince has a way to trigger this ability. There's like an artifact or a heroic trait that lets you trigger it on a hero. Is there any other way to trigger Eye of the Gods in the game?
I think you already said it, yeah, because the Demon Prince can do it based on a unit that has the same mark. And then you have the heroic trait, was it? But it's only for heroes, not named heroes, not unique heroes.
Yeah.
I think those are the only 2 right now. And this, yeah.
Because the Chosen don't do it anymore, right?
No.
No. Okay. Keep going.
Yeah, yeah. So even though it doesn't trigger that often as it used to, I think these buffs, as they are now, are way better. And even though you get to roll a d6 and re-roll it, the odds of rolling the 5 up, even if you try twice, is quite high, and then you can pick whatever you need, or at the rend, and that's way better than it used to be, I think. It's it's given me a lot, and especially a lot of armies. For example, still have a unit of 6, 7, 8 on the table, including some Chef. So these Chef are really easy Eye of the Gods triggers to buff up your pieces more and more.
Yeah, what did you mean by 6, 7, or 8 on the table?
Well, like units, like slaves is quite elite. If you go the Vanguard way, you don't have a lot of units on the table. And most armies are 2, 3 regiments. Some have 4. 7, 8 units on the table, and every unit is a roll on the Eye of the Gods, and especially if the army has recursion, so you can kill it again and roll again.
Sure. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about the old Eye of the Gods table, and they used to be a 7 and 8 result on the table. So I thought you were still talking about the table of the Eye of the Gods table, not the battlefield. But yes, that's a good point. Okay, anything else you want to say about Eye of the Gods before we move on to Marks of Chaos?
No, not really. I think we covered it all. It's like the go-to is go for the rent and a one-time add 1 to the hit rolls and keep your Bellicor safe by improving the ward.
Nice. Yeah, it's an amazing ability, and I'm glad it's not tied to heroes anymore, or just undivided units. It's super cool. Okay, so Marks of Chaos.
Yeah.
So basically, a certain number of Slaves to Darkness units can have the ability to take a Mark of Chaos on them. And then I'll skip to the point below. If a unit with a Mark of Chaos keyword is replaced, the replacement unit has the same Mark of Chaos keyword. That's kind of interesting that you can't choose it again. Now, what about the ones that are officially, like the Gaunt Summoner has the Tzeentch keyword. Does he get to use this? Do you know?
No, because he already has the mark.
No, that's what I mean. But does he get to use the Tzeentch one? Is it a mark? I mean, it just has the, because they didn't technically. If you read this, you know, like, because okay, if you're looking at like a general war scroll, I'm looking at the Theridons right now. It says as an ability, Mark of Chaos during army composition, pick one of the following keywords. But this doesn't say so. So like on the Gaunt Summoner's War Scroll, it just says Tzeentch down below like it would anywhere else in the, you know, kind of in the game. It doesn't say he is Mark of Chaos Tzeentch. So I feel like that's maybe an FAQ question, is does he get to use the Mark of Chaos ability because he has the Tzeentch keyword, or does it have to literally say on the War Scroll, this is his Mark of Chaos? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how it used to be too with like the Slaughter Brute and the Mutalith Vortex Beast, that there was some kind of like, I think it officially said on their War Scroll that they have to take that that keyword. Anyway, it is what it is. So we've got 5 different areas, one for each Chaos God plus the Undivided. So we're just going to go through them in order. I'm going to start here with Undivided. So add 1 to wound rolls for combat attacks that target a hero or monster. Douwe, how often are you taking this? I know let's take a world where the other ones don't exist, okay? Adding +1 to wound is great, but how often is your unit reliably going to go against a hero or monster?
Yeah, well, yeah. If you're going up against the Sons of Behemoth army, then it's really helpful. But yeah, it's not your go-to. Although a lot of like heroes and units have the undivided keyword already and can't pick a keyword.
Yeah.
And I just double checked, and like it is now, it adds that keyword. So every unit that already has a keyword gets to use this bit, the rules in here.
Okay.
But for instance, like an Archeon has a mark of Undivided. Next to that, he can pick one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some cases that Undivided can be handy, but it's not your go-to.
So, for example, we'll talk about Abraxia later, but Abraxia is an undivided keyword locked. And Abraxia has an ability that makes a hero's attacks have 1 less attack. So by being undivided and having an ability on her War Scroll, another ability that's anti-hero, obviously it kind of sends the message Abraxia wants to go fight heroes, right? That's kind of the message. So
Yeah,
in that kind of
definitely.
scenario, you're like, okay, that's not so bad. And there's definitely a world where Archeon also wants to go fight heroes and monsters, right? Because he is one, and he can go toe-to-toe with those. But if you're taking this on some random small guy that's going to get absolutely stomped by a hero or monster, it seems kind of weird. But yeah, so okay, that's Undivided. Let's move on to Khorne. I think Khorne is going to be a default for a lot of people. And I think you took it on all of your like hammer units in your lists. Add 1 to the attacks characteristic of the unit's melee weapons for the rest of the turn if the unit charged. And remember, in 4th edition, that includes countercharging. So if you get a good countercharge off, then you're getting it every turn, as long as you weren't previously in combat. Let's hear your thoughts on this, Douwe. I mean, it's pretty much does what it says on the tin. But how often are you feeling like you get locked in combat and you don't get a chance to charge with the units that you wanted to have this ability on?
Yeah, well, yeah, you only want to have this ability on the units well, yeah, your hammers, like you mentioned. So, for instance, the Chosen or the Vanguard. And well, if you use this like on Chosen and Vanguard, you add one attack. It doesn't sound like much, but if you look at how many attacks they normally have, you're improving them quite a lot. And with the power through command ability now, yeah, you can almost always make sure you yeah, get them out of combat to try it again, or use the current buff the next turn as well. So it almost never happens that they aren't able to charge
That's a good point. Yeah,
if you play the movement game correctly.
yeah, I feel like saving that one CP for power through is like a next level thing, and I just haven't gotten there yet. But I'm trying. I'm trying to get there. But I think that's almost like a tax that you're paying. If you're taking an army that really needs to get its charge buffs off, and Vanguard is a great example with +1 damage on the charge. Chaos Knights also +1 damage and +1 rend. And if they got the Mark of Corn, then you're definitely needing to save that CP, like you said, for a power through. So,
Yeah.
the other thing, I said it before, but I just want to reiterate here for people that don't know at home, these attacks, these buffs do not impact your mounts, your companions. So the +1 to wound does not impact the horses of the Vanguard, and it does. The +1 attack also doesn't. So maybe that's a bummer to some people, but I think that's a message that still needs to keep getting out, because I think there's probably a lot of people still playing that wrong in the, let's at least say, the non-competitive version of the meta out there. Okay, Tzeentch, probably the worst one, but Douwe, I'm keen to hear your take on this. The unit has a 4+ ward against mortal damage inflicted by spells and manifestations. Now, it's worth pointing out that manifestations can do damage outside of mortal damage. So let's say you're looking at the Purple Sun. Let's say the Purple Sun rolled over you with its move ability. That's mortal damage, and that would qualify for this ward save. It also has an attack profile that just happens to have crit mortals. And those crit mortals would also be warded off of this, because that's also an ability. However, the rest of its attacks are just normal attack sequence attacks, and they have to be saved and don't get to use this ward save. So, you know, there's some version of reality where manifestations are coming into this discussion, but a lot of manifestations are doing most of their heavy lifting, especially in Morbid Conjuration, by just charging in and being good at combat. How often do you see this as being the one you actually want to choose? Tzeentch has never been popular in the Marks of Chaos world. What are you thinking, Douwe?
Yeah, it's not really good. Yeah, there's almost never yeah, a reason to pick it. I think, like, if you're using for instance, a Chaos Sorcerer Lord or something else with low wounds and being much more vulnerable, for long range spells, then it's okay-ish to have it, because yeah, like for instance, in the Chaos Sorcerer Lord will not be in combat, will not charge or attack heroes or monsters. So then. Yeah, Tzeentch is the most logical to go to, because you won't be anywhere in combat, and all the other marks are for combat. But yeah, the rest of the army, yeah, you shouldn't pick it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about, like, your Chaos Sorcerer Lords don't actually have to be Tzeentch, even though Tzeentch is the magic one, right? They can be anything but Khorne.
Correct.
So yeah, choose freely. And honestly, I probably would choose Nurgle, because it's not really focused. Let's go on to Nurgle anyway. The Nurgle's the defensive one, right? And like, they're not trying to be in combat usually. Maybe the one on Manticore, but the Nurgle one says subtract 1 from wound rolls for combat attacks. Again, only combat. So just for people out there that don't, kind of have maybe a more broad kind of sense of wording in the rules, every time someone tells me that there's a debuff or buff for an attack, and then they want to use it on a shooting attack, I always have them read the rule back to me, because a lot of times the default setting is it only impacts combat attacks, melee attacks, and then sometimes it just says attacks, which means shooting as well. It almost never says just shooting explicitly, but even when it does, it's obvious, right? So I just want to point that out in this case. You're not being protected from long-range shots here, so you need the guarded hero, unlike, say, a hero that you're putting that on. So Chaos Sorcerer Lord, is there any other mark that you'd put on them other than Nurgle? I mean, you just mentioned the
What do
ward
you
against the spells, but I mean, it depends on whether you think they're going to combat. So I guess Zinch or Nurgle, which one
yeah.
do you put on your Sorcerer Lord?
On my Sorcerer Lord, I would do the ward because you still have some spells which do which have an 18-inch range.
Okay.
And if you look at slaves, like your even if you have Chaos Warriors or if you have your Chosen or your Vanguard or your Knights, they're quite tanky. So you will always find a way to keep your Sorcerer Lord out of combat. And yeah, if your Sorcerer Lord gets combat, then it means the rest is all dead. And yeah, you don't have a lot on the table already. So yeah, that's why I normally go for the change. But if you look at Nurgle, yeah, everything that's tanky and needs to tank, yeah, Nurgle keep it keeps it steady and it makes sure you yeah you keep standing there.
Okay, yeah, that and I just checked all of the spell ranges in this lore are 12 inches, and also the ability from the Sorcerer Lord is also 12 inches, which means if you're trying to get it off on an opponent's unit, you have to be within threat range anyway. So I was going to say,
Yeah.
I don't know how many spells are actually 18-inch range, but certainly there are some armies that have them. But if you have to be within 12 inches to be able to do your own spells anyway, you're probably sitting in trouble, the trouble area. So I get that. That makes sense. Okay, so Slaanesh. Lastly, add 1 to run and charge rolls. So the first thing that this screams to me is that you want to give it to a unit that has run and charge. And there used to be a sub-faction for slaves that gave all of your cavalry units basically run and charge. As far as I'm aware, we don't have access to that anymore. Is that true?
That's true, unfortunately, yeah.
So when are you taking Slaanesh? For +1 to charge is good, but of course the greedy part of me wants to have +2 essentially in a given turn by having +1 to run and then again to charge. How often are you taking this?
I haven't yet taken it because I haven't really seen a use for it yet. I've been looking at it. And yeah, it used to be like you can run in charge if you have Mark of Slaanesh, pay a CP for it, and you can, yeah. It's like, for instance, on an Archeon, it was really nice to have. But yeah, now it doesn't help you a lot. I'm looking at perhaps if you go for the counter charge, it could help.
Yeah.
Also looking at the spells, which we will go over in a bit, to make sure you get your counter charges off. But even then, yeah, I would rather have a Mark of Khorne or a Mark of Nurgle.
Okay, fair enough. That's not surprising. When I did some of the calculations later, I did include Undivided because it's technically a buff to your output, but you're really looking at probably Khorne and Nurgle. I would tend to agree. Okay, so let's move on to some battle formations. These are the replacements for sub-factions. Douwe, short, too long didn't read. Are you with me that these are kind of a little bit lackluster? Or do you actually, for all 3 of our lists, we took God's Wrath Warband. Do you want to give a too long didn't read before we go deep on this?
Yeah, well, they're not really that amazing. So everybody can pick whatever they want. It doesn't really affect your list or everything else. And God's Wrath is more of the logical pick, unless you go full Dark Oath or have a lot of Dark Oath. But yeah, they are indeed a bit lackluster.
Okay, so let's get into them. Legion of Chaos. So it's a passive ability. While there is at least one friendly Warrior of Chaos hero, which is, I've summarized this as basically all of your heroes that have Chaos in the title. Exalted Hero of Chaos is one of them. But also, I think, is Archeon also one of these guys too? I think so. Yep. So it's the standard setting, right? There's Dark Oath, there's some other stuff, but it's the standard setting. And then one other Demon hero or Dark Oath hero on the battlefield. So it's a little bit asking you to bring a mixed arms, but I could totally see a list with Bellicor plus normal heroes, and then you already have it. Add 2 to the control scores of friendly slaves to darkness units while they're contesting an objective that's wholly outside friendly territory. So then that begs the question is how many missions have objectives that are, in how many missions do we have objectives that are even wholly outside? There are some missions that there are none. They're partially in both territories. So I do think this is a cool ability, but Douwe, we both agree God's Wrath is probably the default setting. And my little note above, I said relatively default setting option, especially for elite lists that struggle with objective control. But then again, it depends on the mission, depends on the meta, it depends on what you're bringing in your list. What are you thinking about this? Is there any version of reality where you take this over God's Wrath?
Perhaps, yeah, specifically to a tournament where I know the plans and I know that all of the objectives are wholly within, wholly outside our own territory. Perhaps then I would consider taking this battle formation. But if there's even one battle plan having objectives in the center on both territories, then it will be a no-go for me.
Fair. Okay, so let's move on straight on to Despoilers. Despoilers is a meme list. I'll read it real quick, but once per turn army as a reaction to you declaring a fight ability for a Demon Prince. So first off, you got to have a Demon Prince. I think they're a great unit, but that's not the problem here. So the Demon Prince, using that fight ability, basically just gets the normal 1-2 punch ability that we see often in the game, where a hero fights and they bring someone else in to fight right after them. So you pick a friendly non-hero Slaves to Darkness monster or beast unit that has not used a fight ability this turn and is wholly within 12 inches of this unit to be a target. At least it doesn't have to be within combat range. And the target can be picked to use a fight ability immediately after. So here's a list of all the beasts and non-hero monsters. Once again, it's the same list as before. As I said before, I don't know if you're actually taking many of these units, and if this is really something you would want to give one of the other battle formations up for. As I said above, I said it's more of a meme than anything else, seeing as the available units that synergize with this aren't necessarily your top choice that you'd want to bring in as a second unit fighting anyway. Douwe, what else do you want to say about this? What are you thinking?
I've got nothing else to say. You're totally right in this one.
All right, let's move on. Here's the good one. And I'm going to say it's the good one, but at the same time, I can imagine a world where it doesn't come up as much as you'd like it to. But let's get into it.
Yeah, it's the least worst.
Yeah, that's right. That's the best way of saying it, I think. Once per turn army, end of your turn. So that's important. It's only happening 5 times per game. Pick an objective that is contested. It doesn't have to be controlled by any friendly units to be the target. So you just have to toe on that objective. Place a defiled token next to the target objective. Then roll a d3 for each enemy unit contesting an objective that has a defiled token. On a 2+, inflict an amount of mortal damage on that enemy unit equal to the roll. So we all know what this means now. On a 3 or 4, you're doing 2. On a 5 or 6, you're doing 3. Now, so this is only going off 5 times. It probably not the first turn unless you can get a toe on an objective somewhere and not die. And obviously they have to have someone on that objective as well to do any damage, right? The good news is once you put a defiled token on an objective, it stays on the objective for the rest of the game. And then every single end of your turn, so 5 turns or 4 more or whatever you have left after having defiled it, then you get a chance to trigger it, which is basically making them make a trade-off situation where they're saying, do I want to risk putting a unit? For example, let's say I'm miscast on my little foot wizard, and if I have him on this thing too long, he's going to end up dying. So I've got to swap him out with a unit that's tankier that can take it or whatever. So, you know, I can imagine that being a problem, but depending on how many objectives are on the board, depending on how movable and maneuverable you are to go put a toe on something and still have a model on it at the end of the turn, it could or not. It could come into what am I trying to say? Come into play or not. So I said above, probably the default choice unless you don't think your army will be able to touch enough objectives. Douwe, how often has this come up in your games? How many objectives? Let's say you've got, I don't know, it doesn't matter how many objectives. What percentage of the objectives have you been able to defile? And then how much of a difference has it made in your games?
Yeah, I think most objectives I've been able to defile in the end. But yeah, it's the question if it makes a difference. Yeah, not really. You can use it a bit to your advantage, but for instance, using a cheap unit of Furies, which are fast, tiptoe on objective, defile it, and yeah, then doing a bit of damage whenever the opponent wants to grab it, especially if the objective is a bit in the center. But yeah, it haven't really made a lot of impact on games where it had to make impact. Let's say it like that.
Sure, but
in some cases it had made impact. So, for instance, on the tournament, it killed Evelynor. The last 2, but it's not like it was needed.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. And now you're in an army that's not exactly known for doing mortal damage. I mean, this is potentially a lot if they're stupid and stand on the objective and just keep taking it, I guess. But like, I don't know. The objectives are so much smaller now. You don't need to necessarily put a million models on them. I don't know. It does. I think your description of saying that this is the least worst, of the objectives is probably, or of the formations is probably the best way of describing this, because you're not taking to spoilers. Legion of Chaos we just described as maybe. We're about to talk about Dark Oath, but I don't think you're currently building Dark Oath builds, right? So. Yeah, let's move on to that, and then we'll talk about what your thoughts are. So, the once per turn army, your movement phase. If there's a friendly Dark Oath hero on the battlefield, which if you're going Dark Oath, you should probably still have some, pick a friendly non-hero, non-unique Dark Oath unit that has been destroyed to be the target. On a 3-up, set a replacement unit half the number of models, rounding up, wholly than 6 of an edge, and more than 3 inches from all enemy units. Douwe, this replaced one of the sub-factions we used to have. What was that called again?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I never used that one because I never really went into the Dark Oath. But yeah, you saw it with Archeon, and a lot of the Dark Oath guys to just flood the board.
Like Spirit,
all the
Splintered Fang. Yeah, like was it Ravagers?
Yeah, was Ravagers indeed.
Okay, and I just put up on a list of which units currently count as Dark Oath non-unique, non-hero units. Fell Riders, Marauders, Savagers, and the Wilder Fiend itself can come back, and even though it's one model, it could come back because it's just rounding up, so it can come back. I think there's some utility with this. My personal take on this is that we haven't seen people really kind of flesh out what a good Dark Oath list would be because it's so new. Is that something you're kind of feeling too, that it's got some legs, it's got some potential, but it's just people haven't had the time to kind of figure it out yet?
Yeah, I think so. I'm honestly now looking at building lists around some Dark Oath as well, because what I notice in my games with, like for instance, Bellicor and the 2 units of Varanguards, is that it's quite elite, and most of the games, if it's going not my way, it's because there are too many objectives. I have too low unit count, and the opponent has too high of mobility or teleport or recursion. So to give a sense of having more units, more chaff, more recursion as well. I'm thinking of like adding a regiment with some Fell Riders and a Dark Oath hero to just spice things up a bit, and to make sure that like opponents still have to keep stand on objective, or else they lose it. And also because it's more than 3 inch from all enemies, and if you look at the Fell Riders Warscroll, they're actually not that bad if they make a charge. And so in your turn, they come up 3 inch away, and so the charge is almost guaranteed, and then it's quite okay what they could do. I think they could kill, like, even if it's half a unit, 3 Fell Riders could be enough to kill a small wizard or something else. So I think it keeps the opponent thinking as well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, the models are neat, and it's kind of weird because they AoS has this weird kind of, let's call it, problem where there are a number of factions that have sub-factions inside of them. I mean it in like a generic sense. Like, so Beast Claw versus the Gutbusters or whatever. And where they used to kind of be their own separate armies. And then, so all these legacy armies kind of feel like they have these books that are kind of like used to be 2 separate armies that just got thrown together kind of haphazardly. But now they introduced the Dark Oath right before 4th edition came out, and it really feels like they want to kind of be a separate army, but they just didn't want to release a separate army of guys that weren't part of Chaos. And obviously we're replacing not all of them, but most of the Warcry warbands, and that's kind of a bummer that those are gone, and now you got to play these guys. I don't know. It's a weird direction for GW. It's kind of a left turn. What are your thoughts on that? Do you kind of wish they'd have their own book? Do you like them being in slaves? What are you thinking?
Well, I'm not really quite sure on how they will fit in the book, and I think they will. Well, as it goes now, it looks a bit like they will just be forgotten. Just some other books have that as well, and it would be a shame, especially since they're quite new. So that's why I think, like with the new Battle Tome, that they will be one of the units that gets something to yeah, make them a more key piece of the Slaves to Darkness group.
Yeah, I agree. I also think the new Battletome, because we've seen with the Skaven one, they're going to get at least 2 new armies of renown. At least Skaven is, because they don't have any right now. You guys already have one that's built around Dark Oath. And for what it's worth for everyone back home, we're not talking about the Abraxia one, and we're not talking about the Dark Oath one. I think there's definitely something worth talking about, especially with the Slaves armies of renown. But we'll have to come back to that for another video with Douwe at some point. So, but yeah, that's for the future. And I do hope you guys get some more models in Slaves as well. But you've already kind of gotten a rework anyway, so who knows what you're going to get. It does seem kind of premature, though, because you just got a whole bunch of Dark Oath stuff, and now you're getting another book as well, so who knows. All right, battle formations. The last slide I've got is just my summary on things, but Douwe, please add whatever you like to say. I'll just go through the points real quick. There's not a particularly army-defining set to work with here. I mean, it's just kind of what it is. Despoilers is clearly a relative throwaway except for dedicated meme players. Dark Oath lists probably still have room to be to experiment to see how strong they can be, but it's likely the case that they're stronger with a mixed armies build from the rest of the army. And then the choice between Legion of Chaos and God's Wrath Warband is largely dependent on playstyle, list composition, and the meta. Is there anything else you want to toss in there or disagree with?
No, I think that's quite right. Yeah, God's Wrath Warband is the most logical in most cases, but yeah, no, this is true.
Okay, let's move on. So we're going to take a look at the faction terrain, which is also relatively new. Douwe, do you have this faction terrain yet?
Sorry, can you repeat it again?
Yeah, do you have the terrain piece yet?
Yeah, definitely. I have it, and it's a weird piece, especially in this edition, because the terrain pieces costed me some games in a sense.
Oh.
So I'm thinking of just leaving the terrain piece out as a whole in the whole list.
Well, I mean, honestly, what you just said is more interesting than what it does. So can you elaborate on why it costed you the game?
Yeah, definitely. Like in this edition, like a faction terrain is not counted as a unit, but you can charge it and you can fight it, which means that if you, for instance, have some objectives in your home territory and you have your Nexus Chaotica near and some units, it's more upfront, they can just get outside of 9, which is outside of the objective, but next to the terrain piece. Then they can just make a charge roll, even if they roll a 2, because they're already standing next to the terrain piece. They can just move the 2 inches, then also pile in. So you can really abuse terrain pieces by teleporting outside of 9 of units, but next to the terrain piece have a free charge and thus making it onto the objective or even into the unit. That's 9 inches away, because if you move 6 inch and then you pile in 3 inch and then you have a 3 inch range, then you still have a 12 inch threat range in total. So yeah, the terrain pieces bring a lot more problems than that they help with this the ruling currently.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a big one too, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's really large. So you can't really put it in a corner or on a place where people can't abuse it.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about the rules really quick. It has cover and impassable, but draw power is our first rule, and all of these go off in your hero phase, not your opponent's. You roll a dice, and then you give a number of power points to this terrain feature equal to the roll, so on a d6. This terrain feature can have a max of 12, so if you hit 12 and don't feel like spinning them, you just stay at 12. Infernal Sorcery. If this terrain feature has 3 or more power points, so this to me feels a little bit like cosmic power points for what Seraphon used to have in Starborn, but anyway, not just kind of how it works. But so if you have 3 or more, you've got kind of an economy. You can either spend 3 or 9. We'll see the 9 in a second, but you can pick a friendly Slaves to Darkness wizard within 3, which is pretty punishing, I think. Because you basically got to have your wizard camping out next to the Nexus. And if you have a list that only has, say, like Archeon or Bellicor in it, I kind of have the feeling they kind of want to keep moving upfield to fight with the rest of your guys. And so they're not standing next to this thing. And then you're putting this thing, maybe in light of that, you're putting it closer to the edge of your territory, closer to your opponent's side. And then it's just giving them that charge target, like you just said. So I don't know if it's really doing what it wants to be doing. Plus, you have to spend 3 power points to do it. You remove those 3, And then you add 1 to casting rolls for that one target. Now, if it said for all wizards standing around it, I'd be maybe more interested. But Slaves isn't exactly a wizard's army anyway. They have wizards, but I wouldn't say that that's their main thing. So, Douwe, how is that? Is that coming into your games? Are you just kind of over it? What are you thinking?
Well, it's like a bit like you say. So, for instance, if you have an Archeon or a Be'lakor, or in case only a Be'lakor as a wizard, you want to keep moving him up, up the field and not within 3 of the terrain piece. So it's hoping on rolling 3 up in your first hero phase to use those 3 points to add to the casting rolls, do some spells, move up, are outside of 3, and then then you just generate power points for the next ability to do in turn 4 or 5, hopefully.
Yeah, so I mean, also thinking about it is like your spells all have a 12-inch range, your lore spells, the chaos lore spells. So if you're standing next to your terrain piece, unless you deploy it further up the field, you're not getting to cast those with a buff, probably, because their ranges, I mean, obviously you could, some of them target your own units, but so that's good. But then if we're talking about Morbid Conjuration or whatever manifestation lore you want to take, then I guess that's good for putting something on the board, especially if it has a casting value of 8 or something. But I don't know. I don't know if it's, like you said, worth putting the whole threat or the kind of risk of putting the terrain piece on the board. Let's move on sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a lot of risk and some trade-off. And like you mentioned with the morbid manifestations, like normally if I get the +1 to cast, then I just try to put 2 of the manifestations on the board in the first turn, because I know that an 8 is hard to get if you don't have any bonuses to cast. But that's the only use you really have for it.
Yeah.
And with the 12-inch range, you have the demonic speed. That's an important spell for your own units, but. Yeah.
Okay. And then the last thing, like you were mentioning, if you can get all the way up to 9, which isn't the max, but so you could technically get up to 12 and then blow. There's nothing stopping you from blowing both of these in one turn if you get up to 12, right? Because it can still use, it's not a core ability, so it can use both of these. You could blow a 9 and a 3. But if you blow 9, then you pick an objective or terrain feature within 24, which again encourages you to put it further up the field. To be the source. Then pick any number of enemy units within 3 inches of the source to be the targets. And then roll D3 for each target. On a 2+, inflict an amount of mortal damage on the target equal to the roll. How often is this coming up for you?
Yeah, once per game. And of course, then you roll a 1.
on one unit, yeah. Is it more of a deterrent that they're thinking this could happen? So all the terrain features and objectives that are within 24 of the terrain piece, I'm just not going to put units around?
Yeah, it's not something important, and my opponents don't really look into the terrain piece, and I myself just leave the terrain piece as it is as well. Yeah, if I kill a unit with it, it's fun, but it really doesn't help, and it's not worth guarding the terrain piece or anything. And just like now we're talking now with what you said, you can do both. I'm not thinking like with Infernal Sorcery, it's your hero phase, but it's not like a once per turn or once per. So if you have 12 points, perhaps you can do it 4 times in a row.
Yeah, sure.
It hasn't got any restrictions in it, like once per turn, your hero phase.
Yeah, but no, so the Gaunt Summoner, which is in this book, but I also think of from a Tzeentch perspective, has that setting something in deep deployment, but I originally read that rule and thought, he can just do this rule as many times as he wants. But I've come to understand that that's not how that works. He can only use it once. Each ability can only be used once per turn. The reason I think you can stack the 9 and 3 is because they're separate abilities.
Exactly.
So that sounded great, but I don't know if that actually works. But maybe they'll change the way, or maybe they just need FAQ, that kind of thing. But that would be cool if you could have 2 wizards both get +1. So yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the enhancements. We'll try to go through these quick because your lists don't even have them mostly, or at least your main list didn't. If we're looking at heroic traits, we've got a deployment phase ability, a once per battle combat phase, and a hero phase. We're going to go through them in that order. So the deployment phase ability, Favored of the Pantheon. This is a pretty good one, I think. This unit can use the Eye of the Gods abilities if it were the end of the turn and destroyed an enemy unit. I don't know. You didn't use this one on your one list that had the Chaos Sorcerer lore, but I understand why, because the Eye of the Gods isn't that great for a wizard that's trying not to get in combat. But would you put this on another unit that's like a fightier unit?
Well, I would if there will be any good non-unique heroes, and there are not a lot of like, fighty non-unique heroes you really want in your list. So, like, if you look at a Chaos Lotter Carcadrag or Chaos Lotter Manticore, could be options. But those are not your go-to units to put in a list, especially looking at their points. Like a Bellicor or an Eternus or Abraxia can't take that one. So it's normally not the one I go for.
Sure. It is a good ability, but
Yeah.
I understand your point. If we move on to the once per battle any combat phase, so that could be in your opponent's combat phase as well. This unit can use 2 fight abilities. It's basically the Vanguard ability, and then they get strike last for the second one. So does this go? I mean, it kind of goes to the same point. You said there aren't a whole lot that you're like trying to get into combat. Maybe a Demon Prince? Maybe?
Maybe ish. Yeah. It's not perhaps. If you're gonna go for the what was it, for the despoilers, then perhaps this is the fun one.
Oh yeah, because then they could bring a second unit in with them, so they could bring it could be a total of 4 units. Oh, it would be strike last, so then they couldn't. So
Yes, I don't really know how it will work with the pick a unit, fight with the unit one, but I don't. Yeah,
yeah,
it this is also more of a gimmicky thing. I'm not really looked into this bit like into this one. It's not your
sure. Oh,
go-to for most heroes.
okay, so you said that a non-unique hero obviously can't take these, but if they could, which one would you take between the first two? Like, let's say Bellicor or Archeon could take one of these.
The Eye of the Gods, definitely.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. So my thing about once per battle abilities is you really only want to take them if it's going to change the game. And so like the KO one, Celestial Burst Grenade, that turns off a ward save for 1 shooting phase, that can change the game. You know, like
Yeah,
you only need that one turn to shoot something dead that otherwise wouldn't die. But getting to fight twice, like you said, on the units that can take this is, I don't even know if Archeon fighting twice is enough to change the game. You know, it might be. I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah,
Only Abraxia, perhaps.
sure, and only if she charged.
Yeah,
Okay.
against a hero or a monster.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the real one, I guess, is any hero phase, so including your opponents. You can pick each damaged friendly unit wholly within 12 inches of the unit to be the targets. That's already sounding great. Roll a dice for each target. On a 3+, heal 1. Heal the target 3 health points instead if it's a monster. All right, so this brings me to 2 questions. One, first off, you have an army list that has only a unique hero, and so you're not going to take any of these. Do you think this would have made a difference for some of your Vanguard games if, say, your Bellicor could have taken this?
I think it would have helped quite a lot, especially with Bellicor. Yeah, it's not really that he died a lot, but yeah, he suffers wounds real quick, so healing him up does help with using him more aggressive, to say. So yeah, if it would be usable, it would really help. Yeah, but it's not.
Sure. I mean, you could put
Yeah.
it on like a hero that walks along with him. Let's say like a Centurion Marshal or something, right? That can keep up with him
Yeah.
a bit, and then he keeps getting to heal. That could be something because he is a monster, so you have a guaranteed heal 3 on a 3+ right? But
Well,
that's yeah.
it's on a 3+.
That's
So
well, that's what I said.
makes it a
Yeah,
bit,
yeah.
yeah, that makes it a bit iffy. And what you say is a good one. Like if you have a Centurion Marshal, for instance, which is a bit quicker, yeah, it could help. But if you look at the points cost and you're taking like a hero unit for 100 to 200 points for like this healing ability, because most named heroes don't really have much usage per se. If you look at the Belagor Vanguard combination. Um, Yeah. So else I have to swap out, for instance, some knights or Varengard for a potential heal, and that's yeah,
Yeah. A, th-
not a real.
a 3-up is pretty rough, yeah. And then the question of whether it's a monster, there just aren't that many monsters in this army that are worth healing, I think. That you're
Correct.
really thinking about taking. So, but I mean, obviously, it seems like this is the one you're saying you should take if you do have a
Yeah.
hero. So, all right, let's move on to artifacts. So we've got a once per battle, start of any turn. We've got a passive, and we've got once per battle, your hero phase. So let's look at the Infernal Puppet. I think you might have chosen this one. Once per battle, start of any turn, so it could be your opponent's. Pick a visible enemy wizard within 24. It's pretty generous. For the rest of that turn, each time the target is picked to use a spell ability, so that'd be every single time they try to cast, if I'm not mistaken. That's the only
Yeah.
thing that's a
Correct.
spell ability. Inflict D3 mortal damage on the target as a reaction. If the target is destroyed by this ability, do not resolve the effect of that spell ability. So let's say he's got 5 wounds on him. The first time he's a 2 caster. The first time he casts, he takes 3 damage. That spell does go off, and then the second one does 2 or more damage, then it doesn't. What are you thinking about this one?
Yeah, this one is quite good because it makes your opponent think about using the spells, using their caster, and especially if you're going up against like a Seraphon or a Cheech where you have some 3 casters in them. It's really good.
Yeah, now I guess this is kind of a meme, but if you could choose Nagash,
Yeah,
I mean, there you go, 9 casts. I don't think he's going to
yeah,
risk it, but yeah. Okay, cool. But it's only once per battle, so you got to choose your moment well. But that's also Be'lakor. So if you're okay with the Be'lakor ability, I guess you're kind of like okay with this. And we had something kind of like that in the Antorian season, the last GHB that we had. It was like, what was it, Pouch of Null Dust or something like that, where if
yeah,
once per game they got punished for rolling doubles or something on their casting values.
yeah. That's correct
Yeah,
indeed. Yeah,
so a similar kind of like deterrent. Okay,
yeah.
so Conqueror's Crown. Subtract 5 of the control scores of enemy infantry units while they're in combat with this unit. You didn't choose this one for yours. Do you not like the ability, or do you just think the other one's way stronger?
Well, it's really if you look at it at first, it's only infantry units, and
Hmm.
there are a lot of armies that really are not reliable on only infantry, and it's subtract 5 from the control scores. Like the objectives are really small right now. So what I've noticed in my games that it almost never happens that you're with 2 larger units on the same objective. It's always a larger bit of one player or the other player's units that on them. So that reducing 5 not always has a lot of impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had some games against Soulblight where it came down to the standard bearer on the objective,
Okay.
and that
Yeah,
one.
but then it makes a lot of difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was also that mission where if they're, I forget what the wording was, but where they count, or every non-hero unit counts as 1 extra if they're the underdog. And that also made a huge difference too. I don't know. People have been talking about control scores being a big deal. I've seen it in a couple games, but I'm curious what everyone in the comments wants to say about their experience with control scores thus far. I do take your point that only affecting infantry can be pretty minimal, because if you had to pick a unit that had a lot of control score to play with, it would be an infantry unit. Let's say you're playing against clan rats, a block of 20. Subtracting 5 is probably not getting you that objective. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we've got a once per battle your hero phase Realm Warper's Twist Rune. Pick a terrain feature within 12 to be the target. If the target does not have obscuring terrain ability, it gains it until the start of your next turn. Then roll a dice for each model friendly and enemy within 1 inch. For each 5+, do 1 more damage. I don't like this ability. Tell me why I don't like it. What's going on here? What do you think about this ability?
Yeah, well, it's also again the once per battle and in your hero phase, so not after the moving,
Mm.
because then it would be better if it would be like once per battle and then in the shooting phase. But yeah, if you look at the terrain and especially at some tournaments, it's not always there are a lot of forest, for example, or terrain pieces where you can stand on. It's most of the time like stones or houses where you have to move.
Around them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
around them indeed. So yeah, the effect is minimal then.
Yeah, and a 5 up is pretty low. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's within 1 inch. It's not pick a unit that's within 1 inch and then roll a die for each model in that unit. It's, yeah, I take your point. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things wrong with this. If you get to do it every turn, I think maybe it'd be more interesting. But even then, you know what it reminds me of is the Fomeroid Crusher's ability. I don't know if it still has it, but with the like kind of terrain-oriented Mortal Wounds thing, where he's basically throwing part of the terrain at you. Kind of
Yeah,
also.
there was a kind of ability, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so of these three, you're taking Infernal Puppet, I hear.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Spell lores. So we got an unlimited spell. Goes off a 5, and you pick, let's see. Sorry, you pick an enemy unit within 12 inches, and then if it fails, this is one of the only spells that's like this, it does D3 mortal damage to the caster, and by fail I mean that you didn't happen to get a 5 off, or it was unbound, which is pretty rough, but it does 3 mortal damage to the target. Now, we used to have this spell as well, if I'm not mistaken, in the spell lore. Of course, it wasn't unlimited before. Is there any version of reality where you just load up on Sorcerer Lords and just try to spam mortal damage your enemy to death? Is that a thing?
Well, I thought about it, but yeah, it's still 12 each. But yeah, I think that's part of a meme list that's worth a try.
Okay, fair enough. And, you take the damage, but whatever.
Yeah.
Do we have a bodyguard unit in this army that would take the ward for you or give you a ward?
No, I guess not.
I don't think so, yeah. Okay, so on a 7, we've got Binding Damnation. We're looking at, again, a 12-inch range, and this time we're picking an enemy unit as well. And the target has strike last. Now, you were mentioning the Bellicor thing, but I actually thought about this as a double redundancy thing. Like in your hero phase, you could try to cast this with Bellicor on that unit, because like you said, on a 4-up, your units have strike first. But if you give one unit strike last, that's kind of functionally the same thing. Did this come into play in your games?
Yeah, most of the time it hasn't, because like the strike first ability is only in the enemy's turn, and in your own ability, in your own turn, yeah, you will strike first anyhow. Like it's your turn, your pick, and unless someone has like a strike first ability. So I would only use this to minify or to nullify the strike first of an opponent. Yeah, in other cases, to be honest, like the Spite on Curse, the 3 mortal wounds. Yeah, helps more.
Oh, okay. All right, fair enough. Yeah, you'll see in my list. In my list, I feel like this ability is really important, but in your list, it's less necessary. Okay, and so the last one is Demonic Speed. I think this is probably your favorite from what I'm hearing. A casting value of 7. You pick a friendly unit, wholly within 12, because that's usually how it is. A wholly for friendly units, just within for enemy units. For the rest of the turn, add 1 to the number of dice rolled when making charges to a maximum of 3. So it's basically a 3d6 charge. I'm assuming this is really popular for your list. Like it's something you're trying to get off before, pretty much every turn if you can. Am I wrong?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is also my go-to spell for the like in the opponent's turn.
Oh, sure.
Do a 3d6 counter charge.
Fair. I mean, do you usually have enough? You said you're saving a CP for power through, and you're also saving, and now I hear, 2 CP for a counter charge. So what's your one other CP used for?
Yeah, well, it depends on how it all goes, but yeah, most of the time, like or a rally or a power through. So you have the 1 CP for the cast, 2 CP for the counter charge, and 1 for the power through if needed.
Yeah.
And if I think I don't need the power through, then it will be an all-out defense or an all-out attack. But most of the time, like save it for the opponent's turn. So that also means that I'm almost always only have 1 CP if the opponent started his turn, because then I'll use 3. And I only have 1 in my turn. And all the way around, I don't use any CP in my own turn, unless I have to for rerolling charges.
Well, you're a much smarter, wiser man than I am, because holding back is tough. But that does sound great, especially with your list. I think it's really needed. But that's great. It's a good tip. Okay, so if you were to rank these, would you go demonic speed, spite tongue curse, and then binding damnation? Is that kind of your priority list here?
Yeah, not necessarily. I think demonic speed is the primarily indeed, but the Python curse helped me like with dealing the last couple of wounds to cripple a unit more or kill off a unit because it's three mortals. It's not like a D3.
Yeah.
So in some cases you have like even against another Guard unit or another cavalry unit, which are 4 wounds or 5 wounds, and they already suffered 2 or 3. Then you can just kill off another model, or even against like small heroes with only 5 wounds and they already taken 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Then those last 3 are just enough to finish it off. So in those cases I use the Spite on Curse, or else then I would use Binding Damnation.
Yeah, we were just talking about freeing your units up so that you can charge the following turn, or let's say that turn. This could be one of your kind of last go moves to making sure that they're free. If you can remove that unit that your Vanguard's in combat with, then all of a sudden they're free to charge. So,
yeah,
pretty good.
Yeah, because it's very likely that if you look at 3 mortal damage, that if you try to finish off a unit and you whiff a bit and the other spikes a bit, that from a unit of 20 models, like 1, 2, or 3 models keep on living, and then that spell frees you up.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's move on to the manifestations. We can go through these quick because no one's taken them. So we're starting with Darkfire Demon Rift. 7 casting value, set up holier than 12 outside of 9. That's standard for moving spells. 9-inch move, 6 health, 6 up save, 6 up ward, 7 banish. It's got a ranged attack that's just fine shooting in combat. It's also got, unfortunately, that ranged attack is 8 inches, which means it's not shooting the turn you set it up. That's important. And then melee weapons, 3 attacks, 4s, 2s, no rend, D3. It's kind of a whatever. Its passive ability says, each time a spell is successfully cast by a unit within 12 inches of this manifestation, give this manifestation 1 ruinous energy point to a max of 6. So that's including your own casts. Of course, the turn you set it up, it could only, it gets 1 less because it was one of the casts. Each time this manifestation uses a shoot ability, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of its Darkfire Torrent for each ruinous energy point it has. So that's the shooting ability. So you're adding 1d6 plus whatever it has. And then if this manifestation is removed from play, remove all its points. Okay, sure, because if you bring it back, you're not getting more. Okay, let's pretend Morbid Conjuration doesn't exist. So if we're going to talk about these, we gotta accept that Morbid Conjuration doesn't exist. Let's assume all of them don't exist, okay? How useful is this spell in a vacuum? Would you cast this?
Yeah, not likely. Yeah, unless like if you look at the other spells and looking at a Bellicor, for instance, or other wizards, and a power level of 2 total or higher, then 1 could be 3d6 charge. Yeah, and then this endless spell could be your second spell if there's no enemy unit in range for the other spells.
Yeah. Adding only +1 to attack for the shooting ability seems kind of weird when you might as well have give it +1. It's going to die to a swift breeze, right? Like, I mean, whether they're going to want to attack it or not, I don't know, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on to the Realm Scourge Rupture. Casting value 7, and it's not moving. It is moving, sorry. So it's also wholly outside 12, or sorry, outside 9, wholly then 12. 9-inch move, 6 health, 5 up save, 7 banish, probably a 6 up ward. Melee attacks are just whatever. It has crit 2 hits, which is functionally like having +1 to hit. Any charge phase, including your opponents. If this manifestation charge, so I take that back. Manifestations can't charge in the opponent's turns because they can't take CPs. So it might as well just say your charge phase. If it charged, pick an enemy unit within 1 inch of it to be the target. Roll a dice for each model in the target unit. For each 6, do 1 mortal damage. If any models in the target unit are slain, subtract 1 from hit rolls. Douwe, I'm going to tell you why I don't like this ability already. First off, it's a anti-horde on a 6-up, which is the worst version of anti-horde. Second thing is, if that unit is so big that a 6-up anti-horde is enough to kill like a meaningful amount of models, they're probably so shitty in combat that minusing 1 from hit isn't really a huge deal. Yeah, are you on the same page with me? Like, if this hit a unit of clan rats, I'm not really like worrying about that with their punchback, you know?
Definitely. No, you're totally right in this one.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to say about this thing?
Not really.
Okay.
It's not a great spell.
No. All right. Last one. Let's see if we can get lucky here. This is the one that doesn't move. Do 8-fold Doom Sigil. 7 casting value. You can set it up holy than 12. It's got a stats wheel, but more importantly is just the passive ability. If 2 or more units, friendly or enemy, were destroyed this turn, for the rest of that turn, add 1 to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons used by friendly slaves to darkness units while they're holy than 12. I actually think this has some use, right? Like this is, if you put this up, it's basically emulating the Mark of Corn. If you happen to be standing around it, right? That's a big if. And if 2 or more units were destroyed this turn, which means that you had to have destroyed them somewhere else probably to benefit from this, because if you only have 2 units, you probably haven't destroyed 2 or more units by the time you still have another unit left to fight. Now, Varangard do get to fight twice. I could see a version where they destroy 2 units, and then for that second fight at the strike last, or if you have a Broksha, whenever, then they get the +1 to attack on top of maybe a Mark of Corn. Is there any version of reality in your games where this could have been useful?
No, that's a really good question. Yeah, and I don't think so. It's most of the time it's 1 unit versus 1, and I think it could be helpful if you bring a list with much more chaff or like Chaos Furies, which only have 6 wounds, and just let them be slain just to rank up the units killed. So then if you get to, if you want to choose the Varangard to attack, they have an extra attack. But that also means that the Varangard are in combat with something that's already hitting them before they will hit. So yeah, this one is not my favorite.
I still think it's better than the other 2, but ultimately I just don't think most of the manifestation lores for specific armies are actually pulling that much weight, especially compared to the other manifestation lores out there. Where do you feel like this one ranks against the other ones you've read?
No, I think it's always better to have a moving manifestation and use them as screens. So that kind of a usage to block enemy units.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's move on. Douwe, we're finally to some Warscrolls. Thank you for your patience with how these videos play. I basically took your tips here, and then I added 2 of my pet units for reasons, but we'll get to them. We've got Bellicor, which is a favorite of both of us. And actually, for what it's worth, I like all 4 of the units you picked. I just, have my own kind of machinations I'm trying to do right now. You got Bellicor, you've got a Broksha. What'd you say? Sorry.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
Yeah,
Varangard, Chaos Knights, and I've got the 2 Ogroids in here because they got a big glow up even if you don't like them. So let's get started with Bellicor. He's 410 points, which is a good bit pricier than he used to be, and notably cannot be taken in other armies like he used to be famously taken. He's a 2-cast wizard. He's got a once per battle ability to shut down 1 given enemy unit's abilities until your following turn on a 3-up every time they use an ability, which is a difference. And I want to pick your brain about that in a second. His Rampage, as you've already mentioned, gives strike first to him and I think all the units that are around him, but maybe I'm wrong about that, in combat range on a 4-up. And his Warscroll spell is, I think, called Enfeeble Foe, and has -1 to hit in combat, and then it turns off crits. Crits just don't do anything anymore. I said, why pick this unit? He's a War Master, a literal War Master type, so he can take the whole army. He can take any Slaves to Darkness, so he got some flexibility. He's super tanky, being unrendable with 14 health, 4-up save, 6-up ward. Don't underestimate the once per battle ability freeze that he has. And he's fast and doesn't mind being in combat, which is not always true of your centerpieces. There was a world in at least 3rd edition where people would often, maybe because of magical dominance, one of the battle tactics at the end of the edition, would set him over in the corner so that he wasn't doing a whole lot, just so he was out of range of unbinding, and he could always choose the once per battle ability without having a range concern. But I have a feeling he's probably getting a little bit deeper into combat now in 4th edition. Douwe, what are you thinking about that point? And then anything else I've said? What are your thoughts on Mr. the Dark Master himself?
Well, yeah, I think it's really good indeed, like you said, with the ability to shut down and how it's changed right now. Like it's anytime that that picked unit. What was it? I have it right here. It's each time the target is picked to use an ability, roll a dice as a reaction. So it's per ability.
Yeah.
So if you, for instance, fail it for the first ability in that phase, but the second ability you roll it, so you have more chances to stop multiple things instead of an all or nothing, which is quite good. And like you mentioned with the combat part, he has been a key piece with his combat role because his combat stats are quite good now. You don't want to set him up against a too tanky kind of a unit, but he's great to just slay like a Chev unit or something else, or help the Vanguard or other units in delivering some blows. And because of the strike first ability, it only triggers in the enemy's combat phase, and that's the trick with him. He needs to keep up. So where your heavy hitters, be it Chosen or Pterodons or Vanguard, are going, he needs to keep within 3 inch, even after these units have charged, or even he has charged. So in the opponent's turn, which is following, you can give all your units with 3 inch of them, so 3 units in total at max, a strike first, which is really, really insane. But then you need to have him quite on the go in the center of the board, use him really aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, if he had always just been a centerpiece in Slaves to Darkness, I think I'd have less of a problem with him. But in my head, he's just kind of this continuous problem that every Chaos Army was bringing. And I'm actually really glad that he's finally kind of locked to Slaves to Darkness now, so that I can start thinking of him in his actual home. That said, I am sad that Archeon cannot still be in every faction, but that's another topic for a different day. So I also did all the computations. So anyone that's seen any of my Math Hammer stuff, I have saves listed from left to right there, from worse saves to better saves. So 6 up, 5 up, 4 up, 3 up, 2 up. And then we skip a little bit so that you can see the expected value average, which is just a flat average of all 5 of those saves, meaning that a lot of people do your saves opposed to a 4-up save, but I always thought that wasn't fair depending on what army you were playing. And so, especially considering people are less likely to use all-out defense these days because of how many other great command abilities there are to be using, and we've talked about that extensively already. And also how much less save stacking there is. I think if you have a 4-up save, oftentimes they're going to have an actual 4-up save. It's not going to by default be one better. And so I think it's actually relatively fair to say the distribution is relatively as common that you'll see a 2-up save as a 6-up, as common that you'll see a 3-up as a 5, and so forth. Anyway. From left to right, it gets better. His base profile, I like to skip ahead. If you want to look at any particular save, you're welcome to, but I like to skip ahead to the expected value average, which is that last column. He's doing a little bit better, around almost 9 on his base. If he's got undivided, if he's getting, by undivided I mean he's fighting a hero or a monster, then it's going up to almost 10. Same thing for if he's on the charge, but not with undivided, and if he's got both, he's finally getting an expected value of above 10 wounds in a given fight. Douwe, does this line up with your experiences of Be'lakor?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so if you put him against the Chev unit, he's great, and he can wipe out with some luck a small unit of 10 models with like a 4 or 5-up save, but don't expect him to deal a lot of damage against buffier kind of units. So he's great to just help other units around a little bit, or free some free some room.
Yeah, and a note for the scale of these graphs that we'll be showing, for all the heroes, I kept it a scale from 0 to 16, and for all of the units with multiple models, I had it go to 22. So what you're seeing here is comparable to what we see for the other two heroes in this comparison. Okay, so let's move on to Abraxia. Abraxia, Spear of the Everchosen, relatively new model. They didn't have a good photo for me to take of the model here, so it's got that revealed icon down at below. 360 points, so a little bit cheaper than Be'lakor. She has an ability to remove strike last of the once per battle ability from the Varangard, which I think you're going to probably tell me is an amazing ability because, you know, if there was a chance they were going to die, now they just get to wait till the next activation instead of waiting until striking last. She also has a Rampage that does -1 attack from heroes on a 3-up. She does splash, I spelt that wrong, splashback mortal damage. If wounds are coming in, she throws back some back against the fighting unit. She has an ability to boost the output of her main weapon, which is interesting. I keep calling her a she. I think it's a she, but maybe I got that wrong.
She.
Okay. And that ability to boost the output, I'll talk about later when doing the calculations, but basically you roll a die every combat phase. And you can take 1 point of damage, but most often you're boosting your main weapon. And she's also super tanky with a 14 health, 3-up save, 5-up ward, which makes her, on 2 of those dimensions, tankier than Be'lakor because she's got a 3-up save instead of a 4-up unrendable, and then a 5-up ward, which is 1 better. How do you feel about the tankiness of Abraxia? Have you played with her much?
Yeah, I still have to try her because the model is out of stock everywhere. So I have to try to convert some other models into her. But I really like it, and I'm really curious as to how she will do as opposed to Be'lakor, or even with Be'lakor in a list. See how those will help each other.
Yeah. And so why pick this unit? It's kind of similar to Be'lakor. It can take the whole army, overcharges the Varangard to be even more efficient, reduces the efficiency of heroes, solid output, especially if you're good at rolling 6s, which we'll talk about momentarily. Is there anything else you want me to throw in there about, I guess, your theory crafting at this point? But you've seen the Varangard playing. How often would it have made a difference if they could have not struck last, but have struck normally for their second strike?
Yeah. To be honest, like if you position the Varanguards properly, then most of the times the strike last isn't really a big of a deal. So I don't really see, even though she's supposed to help the Varangard a lot, I don't see her helping the Varangard really much. But I think she can really be a solid, freewheeler, going her own way and do her own thing.
Okay, let me propose one other possibility. You're a fan of taking, at least in your main list, 2 blocks of 6 Varangard. What if you were taking 3s only, MSU? What if they were a little bit more fragile because you don't have this big block of 6 that's going to absorb 1,000,000 wounds. You've got half as much absorption. Then do you think that would make a difference? The striking last instead of striking normally?
Yeah, I think then it would make a difference, but that is combined with Be'lakor though, because if you remove the strike last and give a strike first, then you will get the strike first. If you will only remove the strike last, then you will just fight normally. So yeah, then it will make a difference, but it all depends on how you can charge into the units and how the other how the opponent is double screening them. But I think it could help then, yeah.
Okay, cool. So the output for Abraxia, I started with her average, and I want to talk about why I said average, because I could have represented her output as all 3 of the different states that she can get on her chart. Basically, apart from taking a wound, which doesn't stop her from fighting, on a roll of a 1 if she chooses to use the combat ability, if you roll a 2, you also don't get anything. If you roll a 3 to 5, you get, help me out here, you get +1 damage on the thing, and then, is that right? And then a 6 makes it crit mortals with that +1 damage as well.
Yeah.
So, now, what I did is I just did all the computations for her base profile versus a monster and versus a hero, because she's got Undivided, which means she's getting extra stuff against a hero on her Warscroll, +1 rend, and she's also getting the +1 to wound because she's Undivided. So there's a difference between a monster and a hero. So I basically did 3 different calculations for 3 different states. What you would roll on that table, where you get nothing, where you get just the +1 damage, and where you get the +1 damage and crit mortals. And then I took an average of those 3 different states based off of how likely they were to occur, so that you were not getting any buffs was on it was 2 out of 6, that you were getting just +1 damage was 3 out of 6, and that you were getting a crit mortals in addition was 1 out of 6, and then I just averaged them out. So that's what you're seeing in this table. You're seeing the likelihood that at any given moment she's functioning. This is the average function on these functions, so on these different profiles. So if you just skip over to expected value average, she's actually doing worse than Be'lakor, but she is cheaper than Be'lakor. This is not on the charge, by the way, so it's less than 8, let's say 7.5-ish on base. That jumps up to about 9-ish with against a monster, and against a hero, she's still cutting short of 10. However, on the next slide, we go over to on the charge, and you can see that this jumped up quite a bit. If we go to the last column and look at expected value average, where a base is just under 10, against a monster is around 11, and against a hero is pretty much right at 12. So a little bit better than Be'lakor. But it takes her charging. Now, you might say, Ryan, the stats would be way better if I rolled just a 6. Yes, but we don't. What is the chance that you're going to get a 6? It's 1 out of every 6 times that you do it. And that's what this chart shows you. So there is some variance here that's not being captured in this graph. But in general, this is what you can expect from a Broxia on a given day, on a given fight. Douwe, how do you feel about these output numbers? Douwe?
Yeah, I think it's quite it's quite okay, and well, yeah, you kind of have her, and that's why I like her, but what also makes her tricky. You have to roll for some buff. If you roll them, and if you look at the Eye of the Gods, and if you can keep cracking up those buffs of, for instance, giving the +1 to hit, adding extra rend, then you can really capitalize on the potential she has. So I think she's really good. Yeah, but really dicey. But that's what I like.
Sure. Again, Johnny-ish. I didn't take into account any of the Eye of the Gods in this because it's so unpredictable. What you'll get. It's not only what did you roll. It's also did you kill a unit. I think having a Demon Prince in your list helps raise that predictability. But even then, doing all you can see, I already did a lot of calculations built into this one calculation. It adds a lot more dimensions if we start saying, what if you got 2 rend? What if you got rend +1 hit, +1 to hit, and then it gets pretty out of hand. But yes, it can go up from here for sure. Okay, so taking a look at your first unit, Varangard, you get 3 for 310 points. They're basically a unit of 3 heroes. They even used to have a faction where they were the general, or at least one model. They have a once per battle fight again ability with strike glasses. We already mentioned. The Rider profile does crit mortals and has +1 damage on charge. Why pick this unit? As an amazing combo of tankiness, output, and speed. It's usable in both units of 3 or 6, which isn't always true of certain units. It pairs incredibly well with Abraxia, but also good in many lists as a standalone hammer or anvil. And it's probably best with a Mark of Corn, ? But I wrote that before seeing your list, and you've consistently used Mark of Corn with your Varangard. Is there any version of reality where you take them with Nurgle?
Well, yeah, like in the Slaves of Darkness group, there have been a lot of discussions of using with Nurgle, using with Khorne. Some think that their output in the group of 6 is enough, and that you don't need Khorne, and that you can just use Nurgle. My experience is like otherwise. If you use the 6 with Khorne, then you're more sure that they're going to be free instead of keeping stuck. Yeah. And I think in of 3 you always want Khorne, and in the slaves group most people agree with that as well. Unit of 3 always Khorne, unit of 6 iffy, but if you have 2 units of 6 for instance, then a lot of the players will go for 1 unit with Nurgle, 1 unit with Khorne.
Okay. Anything else you want to throw in here before we look at the stats?
Like in the last edition they had a run and charge sub-faction, which is gone now. They are movement 10 now, and movement 10 is it's high, but it's not like as high as it used to be. But yeah, it's I've noticed that if you get the demonic speed with the 3-6 charge, like you could do Alpha Strike back in the day, and that's kind of gone now, which makes the Vanguard a much more fun unit to use in your list, also for the opponent, because it's not like a first turn 16-inch move and then charge in and someone's blocked in their territory. It's much more dynamic to play with now, much more fun to use.
That's great. You know, it's funny. You and I got together on a double date a couple months ago, and when the rules just dropped, I'd said that I didn't think Vanguard were as good as they had been in the past. But I guess I've been proven wrong through not only you but also the meta. So I haven't had to go up against them, but they've been kind of the bane of my existence for a long time. They're not quite as tanky as they once were, right? Because they don't have the ward anymore, but. How's their
Right.
survivability been? You feel like you're losing them a little faster, or has it been reasonable?
Yeah, I'm losing them way faster because I also lose like the Mystic Shield, which we
Yeah,
used to have.
yeah.
So they're dying quite quick, too quick for my feeling. Because as soon as you drop a unit of 6 down to 2 Vanguard, they're a bit more meh. But yeah, I think that also makes like it gives more dynamics to it. So you really have to take into account if you have multiple units, don't rush all in, just go one after the other. So it's became kind of a different game, and you have to be more careful with your Vanguard.
Fair enough. Let's take a look at their output. So, not on the charge. I have the 3 columns here are going to be base, so without any buffs, undivided with +1 to wound against heroes and monsters, and then corn +1 attack on the charge. But remember, this chart says not on the charge. So just to keep it consistent, I let you see that corn, which will eventually outperform undivided, is actually worse than undivided if they're not charging. Is there any version of reality where you would take them as undivided? I mean, are there enough heroes or monsters in the game that you're like... I mean, I feel like Nurgle's got to be number 2, right?
And Nurgle is kind of your number 2 because most cases with Vanguard you want to have like a mark or a buff on them, which works always. So like Mark of Corn always works if you charge. Mark of Nurgle always works in combat. And Undivided is situational based on what kind of unit you're up against. So yeah.
For the people back home, I just want to point out that getting off a guaranteed charge is not always guaranteed, right? Like, I mean, you say it like it's more guaranteed than fighting a hero monster. Maybe it is statistically, but there are armies that are faster than you that could lock you up quicker. And then you're just stuck in combat. And the good news is that you're relatively fast and you're pretty good at determining that you're the charger. But as someone who's been playing Morsar Guard for the past, I don't know, 15 games or so, if they don't get the charge off, they're dead in the water. So, and there definitely been games where I've just gotten stuck in combat and they're not doing anything. Now, good news is Vanguard can still do decently in combat, I think, even if they get stuck in. But then the question becomes, is it more likely that you're going to go up against a monster or a hero in this edition than you are to get your charges off? And I still think you're right, that you're probably more likely to get your charges off. Is there... People were talking about, Honest Wargamer Rob was saying this is going to be a centerpiece monster edition, and I haven't seen evidence of that thus far. Have you?
Nah, really.
Yeah.
I do think though most lists have a monster, but not like in a centerpiece. They're gonna be way up onto the board. So if you look at, for instance, a Karozai or a Krondis, even the players using those are not throwing them just in the center of the board. They're always keeping them back. So it's all more situational, and not all lists have good monsters. Some have monsters, but those are just like your Wilder Fiend kind of monsters.
Yeah, is he a monster?
He's a beast, but
Yeah.
just.
Sure.
So if you look at another monster, it could be more like a Formoid Crusher kind of like
Fair.
monsters.
Yeah, and To your point, a lot of people have also been saying, or maybe a counterpoint is, a lot of people have also been saying that like Halison Toll or the Vendense are particularly good because they got extra buffs against wizards, which are almost implicitly heroes. And people are like, oh my god, this unit is so amazing because they have that. And then I guess the only kind of point in between my point and your point with this unit would be saying, well, we're talking about shooting attacks. At least with the Vendense, maybe not with Halison Toll. And at least they can deliver that to a wizard without having to be in combat with them. And then the question comes down to, can Varangard or other units like your knights get into combat reliably? And it's kind of an open question. We don't have to actually flesh it out here, but that's kind of something that's are people good at screening off their wizards? Do they have enough bodies on the table at this point in the meta to be able to protect their wizards? I've found a lot less bodies on the table than what we had at the end of 3rd edition, but I don't know if that's your take thus far, but yeah. Let's take a look.
True.
Let's take a look at their on-charge abilities. So you can see it's the same scale. It just jumped up quite a bit. So if they're not with any particular buff, let's say they got Nurgle, they're on charge doing on average just less than 14, and that's a unit of 3, by the way. If they're undivided, they're jumping up to about 15 and a half, 15 and 3/4. And then Khorne, they're almost at 18. Now, this is not taking into account that they could fight twice. Even if you assumed that one of them died in between the time that they fought first and struck last, then we're still looking at about what am I trying to say? 150% output of what we're seeing here. So, like, let's say they have Khorne, they got the charge off, they got to strike twice. Let's say they did 18, and then we're adding another 50% at least. So we're adding another 9 to that. So they're up to 27. That's pretty good efficiency for what they're doing. When do you pull the trigger, Douwe, to fight twice? When do you, would you ever do it prematurely just to make sure they have a charge the next turn? Or are you really saving that for like the big climax of the game?
Well, both. So if because I always like multiple units of Varangard, I would like the first unit to just make sure they clear off some screens. So in some cases, it even could be something like if you have some sturdy screens like Stone Guard. I call them screens, but they are a hammer and an anvil unit. Then you just want to fight twice. The Stone Guard unit is gone, and you got some more space. Or if opponent like screen too close to each other because. Like you charge in, kill the first unit, you do your second activation, pile in, kill the second screen, and you free up a lot of space. And then with the other Vanguard unit, you want to keep it and save it for indeed the big unit or the big blob, which is normally unkillable. So it's with one I use them prematurely, and with one I'm being cautious.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's a very measured response. I like it. Okay, so let's move on to your last chosen unit here, which is Chaos Knights, not Chaos Chosen. 5 times 250. The reason I've got 10 on screen is because for whatever reason, the GW JPEG that I downloaded or whatever was not of high quality, so we're using the old one. The Riders have 3 attacks each, 3 threes, 1 rend, 1 damage. They get +1 rend and damage on the charge, which is a great buff. It's a huge difference between the two. Yet, a lot of people take the mark of Nurgle on these guys. They actually have really great efficiency, but we'll get to that in a second. 10-inch move, 4 health, 3 up, save, which is a great profile, really. The 4 health makes a big difference. I've noticed with my Morsar Guard in Ideneth is that a cavalry unit having 4 health versus 3 is a real big overpower buff. Power through buff, because it means that you have a higher health characteristic and then you can power through. So that 4 health is just chef's kiss for a cavalry unit, especially a normal cavalry unit like this one. Why pick this unit? Yeah. It's functional as either a wound sponge or as a hammer. Although most people go with Wound Sponge. They take Mark of Nurgle for the anvil roll or Mark of Khorne for the hammer, and it's easy to build a list around or just sprinkle in. Douwe, what you thinking about all this?
Yeah, it's definitely that. They have multiple uses. They can be an anvil, they can be a hammer. And the thing is why they use them with Mark of Nurgle is because their output is lower than Vanguards, so and they don't have 2 times pile in. So if you whiff it on your activation, then they're kind of stuck in combat. And they won't charge again. And looking at, they get the +1 rend and damage on the charge, going from 1 to 2. So that's like doubling your output. If they get stuck in, they won't do a lot more. So if you give them corn, you really need to make sure that they can always charge. And in most cases, they can't. So that's why most people just play him as the sponge. Put a mark of no-go on him, just bounce it somewhere in, and use him as a nice screen to tie stuff up.
Yeah, fair enough. I definitely think a unit of 5 is not going to do as much as maybe you want it to do, but we're going to look at the stats in a second here, and I actually think back-to-back they do more than you would think. But that said, they have to charge to do that. So let's take a look at that real quick. So this is not on the charge. You can see, and again, it's scaled the same way that the Vanguard were. So it was from 0 to 22. You can see that this looks a little bit, it's all the scores are less than half. And the base versus corn is identical because it's the corn doesn't only goes off on the charge. So in this case, you would argue maybe undivided, but really Nurgle is better for the reasons you just elaborated. If we're looking at, like, say, expected value average, the blue column, just less than 6 damage done against all saves averaged out. Not that great. But when they charge, here we go. That spikes to above 12. We're talking about like maybe 12 and a third, which is really good for a unit of 5. Really good. And then it's capping out on an expected value average of around 16 for a group of 5. And remember, they cost a whole 60 points, if I'm not mistaken, less than a unit of 3 Vanguard, which we've also compared to on this. So the real question is, can you consistently hit that charge? If you cannot, then yes, I think definitely go Wound Sponge. If you do get that charge off, especially with Corn, you're looking at a pretty punchy unit, especially if you double this up. Granted, Vanguard get to fight twice, once per game, but that's hard to represent statistically because you could say, well, they functionally get to fight 1 extra time in a game means if they had every single turn, they get to fight 11 times instead of 10. So that's only a 10% improvement. But that's not how it actually feels, right? Because you choose them to fight at the moment that they need to. But it's hard to represent that in stats. So keep that in mind. But anyway, Douwe, what are you thinking about this output? Have you ever seen a unit of 5 Chaos Knights lift this much, do 16 on average?
Yeah, definitely. And so that's why they are quite nice, because I use them kind of also as a chaff killer, as a screen killer. Just push them in and position them in such a way that they will provide a screen for like Be'lakor, Vanguard, or other stuff you have behind them, knowing that they will be charged onto the next turn. So they're quite good, for dealing the first blow and then taking the next punch.
Nice. Okay, so now on to some pet units. Douwe, you'll have to entertain me here, but I'm going to try to make a case here. I'm not going to make a case that they are the most efficient version of relative to tankiness, because there's a way to calculate efficiency relative to tankiness as well, but it's a much more complicated calculation. But the 2 units I'm about to look at are extremely efficient for output, not worrying about whether they die. Ogroid Myrmidon, which used to be a Warcry, if I'm not mistaken, like a random Warcry one-off monster, like the Mindstealer Spherenx was at one point in history. Yeah. I never played Warcry, but that's my understanding. And the fact that they made this guy better is kind of interesting, because they could have totally just let him kind of fade out into non-existence. You can tell from the way the base is painted that he's a Warcry model, because he's painted with like a black base instead of the kind of like tan. But anyway, 190 points, 6 attacks at 3s, 2s, 1 rend, but 2 against monsters, and 3 damage. He gets +2 attacks if he himself has any damage points on him out of his 8 wounds. He has 6-inch move, which is one of the downsides, I suppose. 8-inch health, 4-up save, and that's also a downside to some people. He's got a 1-2 punch ability with the Therodons, which we'll cover, which he gets to fight, then the Therodons, and then he's doing giving them, not himself, +1 to hit. Why pick this unit? He has shockingly high output efficiency for his points, and we'll talk about that in a second. He combos well with Therodons. He probably wants the Mark of Nurgle for defense, as Undivided doesn't help because +1 to wound on a 2-up doesn't do anything, except ignoring a point of -1. And he probably won't be charging often enough for the Khorne buff. Now let's take a look at the output. Here's him not taking Khorne. So we'll look at Khorne next, but I don't think it's the right move. His base output, if he's not doing anything against, let's say, expected value average, if he doesn't have any buffs on him all, just as a hero, is doing a little over 6 for 190 points, which you almost never see. But if he happens to be damaged, just damaged, the monster is the next one, which of course is more restricted, that's 8. Happens to be damaged, then he jumps up to almost 9. And if he happens to get both, which could happen, versus a monster, and this is of course leaving out all-out attack or whatever else you might be doing, he as a hero, and I want to keep in mind, a hero for 190 points almost never does this, like across the game, almost never, is already punching at around just shy of 11 against all saves. Now, if he happens to have Khorne, it's the same scale, he bumps up to 12 on average, but he can get, as you're seeing here, if he's against a 5-up save, he's looking at going up to 15 for something on average again, with the both, having the versus monster and him being a little bit damaged, which is doing a serious amount of work. And even if he's not damaged, has none of those buffs, against a 5-up or 4-up save is doing 8 to 10 damage, which is on average, which is still pretty great. That's against, again, if he's Khorne on the charge. Now, in my list, which is built around the Ogroids, I do rely on the fact that the spell is going to give an opponent unit that they charge into minus or strike last, so that all the Ogroids get to punch first, and then you're not just having to choose which one takes the hit. And then, of course, I've got Be'lakor on my list, too, to also perhaps in the enemy phase give them strike first, which helps also guarantee that I'm doing okay. So anyway, Douwe, is this a surprise to you, or what do you think of this output? I'm not saying I have to convince you that you should take him in your list, but what do you think about this output? Is this what you would expect from some random Warcry model?
Well, I think it's quite good. Yeah, I didn't think you had this amount of output, and like one of the things you mentioned, like the movement and like the save, for instance, is was something I took in account. That I really wasn't thinking of the Ogroids. But yeah, if you combine it with Be'lakor and the strike first, then yeah, you're going to hit first. So you're having. Quite a good time. I think it's better than expected, yeah.
So one other point about the Ogre Myrmidon that people probably aren't going to be taking into account is that he is an italicized hero, which we'll talk about in a minute, which means he doesn't have to take up a hero slot. A lot of heroes can choose him as I forget the name exactly, but it's one of those italicized heroes that a Centurion Marshal can also go, an Exalted Hero of Chaos, which means he can go into the regiment of another hero. And as you'll see in my list, Be'lakor takes him as an extra hero slot, and then my other hero, which is a Demon Prince, takes him as well as his other hero slot. So I've got 4 heroes in a list that's 2-drop, which means he basically is enabling my Therodons to fight in groups. So basically, if I had a list, I've got my 2 big heroes. I got these 2 guys. They both fight first whenever they fight, and they bring the Therodons in. And if they happen to be around each other, which they probably wouldn't, I could ostensibly, with striking first, get like... I think that means I would get to have like 5 units in a row fight, if I don't have that math wrong, with the Be'lakor ability, giving it out to himself, and then 2 other abilities, and then this guy gets to bring 1 in with him. Let's see, Be'lakor, each one of these guys would get it. No, you'd give one of the strike first to the Therodons. So it'd be Be'lakor, then this guy would have a strike first, then the Therodons would have it as well, and then another Therodon would be your first guy to strike in your turn, and then he'd bring another Myrmidon, and then he'd bring another Therodon. So you could get 5 units in a row striking before your enemy ever got a chance. Anyway, Douwe, do you have any other concluding thoughts before I move on to the Therodons?
I think it's a really good conclusion, and I think in that kind of combination, and as you say it with a Demon Prince to roll for the eyes, I think that that could help a lot as well, like with improving or hits from this Orgroid, or giving him a ward to be more sustainable. Uh,
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at this. Oh, and I also want to look, I'm coming back to his original profile so that we can compare it to Bellicor. Bellicor costs 410 points. I'm just going to go back and forth between these two. This is Bellicor not bracketed, and he can bracket, versus the Organ Myrmidon not corned. And you'll see it's not a huge difference on the same scale. So anyway, there's that. And then I'm going to go to Abraxa's War Scroll here. She costs 360 points. This is her on the charge, so on her best day. And here's the Ogre Myrmidon not corn against not on his best. And you're seeing that she is better, but not so much better that it's almost twice as many points. So anyway, that's kind of my point there. All right, so let's go back. Now we're going to go to some Theridons. You get 3 for 200 points. They each have 4 attacks. They have a monster's profile of 4s and 2s with 1 rend, 2 against infantry, 2 damage. Once per battle, they can bump their output to 3 damage just for free. They have a 6-inch move, 5 health each, so they have a control score of 2, and 4 up save. They are notably efficient for their cost, just like their daddy, if you will. They also have a musician and a banner, which is pretty cool. So they count as 7 models on an objective if all 3 of them are standing there. They pair very well with the Ogre Myrmidon, as I've already explained, because he uses ability and it gives them +1 to hit, and they get to fight right after him. So that's making that a 3+, 2+, so same as him. They probably need Mark of Nurgle for the defense, since Undivided doesn't help and Khorne relies on charging, just like with their daddy, the Myrmidon. So here's their output. This is 3 of the Theridons, not with Khorne. I didn't even look at the Khorne because I'm very convinced Nurgle makes more sense here. So their base profile. We've got base, and then just versus infantry for the extra rend. Then with the Myrmidon only for a +1 to hit, but that could also be an alt attack if you want. So let's say one of the Myrmidons gets it off, and then the other one of your blocks of Theridons uses alt attack. Then getting both off is in the light blue. Then once per battle +1 damage with the Myrmidon. And again, those go off instantaneously. And then the most would be the once per battle with Myrmidon and against infantry. And what you're seeing with a unit of 3 of these dudes, just 3, that with their all buffs included, they're getting to 18 expected value average. The green column there at the end is roughly the same as Varangard fighting only once, to be fair. And then it does taper down, to be fair. But getting at least 1 or 2 of these buffs off is not hard. Especially on that key turn. And remember, they have a once per battle ability just like Varangard do. So pulling that once per battle switch is also a tactical decision. And they're a lot cheaper, 200 for 3 instead of, 310 for 3. And then here's them against Varangard, same scale. Harder to compare because there's so many lines, but you can see that if you look at the last column there, it's not radically different for the good output, but if you scale for how many points they cost, they actually come out higher if you do the math on that. And then here's the Chaos Knights War Scroll, their output. And again, this was Varangard on charge, by the way, and this was not stuck in combat. The Theridons are actually better in combat if they're both stuck in combat. And then Chaos Knights on the charge as well versus the Theridons again. Again, there's some more variance on the Theridons depending on which buffs you get off. But I think for someone who's willing to take a gamble or willing to set things up just right, and also use these really beautiful models, I think for those people out there that have them, this is a great time to give them a shot. Okay, so anyway, Douwe, before we move on to the battle profiles, which I accidentally moved on to, do you have any thoughts about Theridons? It's kind of the same story as Myrmidon.
yeah. Yeah, I think you have me convinced. I think looking at the points, and if you combine them with Bellicor, it's not a bad idea to include some in a group of 6 or 2x3, just to try to roll more dice. And if you think about the bodyguard rule, and I think that if you build that in as well, like build them around the Bellicor with the bodyguard rule for the -1 attack in combination with Nurgle, then you've got a quite sturdy moving castle.
You mean -1 to move with Nurgle? Or wound, I mean? -1 to wound?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and with the bodyguard rule,
with,
not like for the +1 to hit and
uh,
wound or the extra rend. If you use that one, like the pterodons in the Bellucor regiment, and use the bodyguard rule,
oh,
where
that
attacking
one.
units get -1 attack.
Yes, you mean for the GHB.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah, gotcha. Okay, so yeah, that's a
yeah. I
good
think
point.
if you combine that, it's really cool.
Nice. Okay, so we've got the battle profiles. I'm going to just go ahead and tell you guys, these are really complicated. But Douwe, maybe you're more up on this than I am, but this is actually the screenshot of the most recent battle scroll that we got, or whatever you want to call it, where they did a soft FAQ. There are these asterisks that are next to units. Do you know what changed with these three units we see here on the Chaos Lord, Demonic Mount, Eternus, and Exalted Hero? Excuse me, do you know what changed on those?
Ooh,
I don't know.
that's a good question.
It might be
Yeah,
the
I don't know either.
points. It might be who they can bring with them, or maybe the base size. Who knows? But if anyone knows, feel free to
Yeah.
say it in the comments below. I don't know if anyone's really taking those three units, but yeah. But anyway, that's what changed in the most recent one. And then here's the units. Chaos Chosen also changed. I'd be curious to know what changed. But anyway, what I really want to do is here's a summary, okay? And so if anyone watched my video that's kind of old now at this point, but my battle profiles video where I broke down how I like to define these things, I created some new terms. And we have things like unlimited unit, an italics hero, a war master type, a restricted unit. So let's get into those. An unlimited unit would be a unit, and remember we're making a distinction between heroes and then everything else, which is a unit now. Although technically heroes are also units, but not in terms of list building. So no units can be taken by all heroes. That's what an unlimited unit is. For example, in Ideneth, Namarti, Reavers, or Thralls can literally be taken by every single hero. That doesn't exist in a lot of the Chaos armies because a lot of times they're divided between demons and mortals. And in this particular case, they're divided more between Dark Oath and Warriors of Chaos. Anyway, italics heroes. This is the type that, if I go back real quick to let you look at it, an italics hero, I'll go back one more, is the type that, like Ruinous Champion right here, and then you see it up here in italics, the little sideways writing right there, the cursive. Italics hero is the type that can be taken in another hero's regiment. So we've got three different types here. We've got the Centurion Marshal, Exalted Hero, and the Ogre and Myrmidon can all be taken by all of the non-Dark Oath heroes except for the two Gaunt Summoners. Furthermore, we have a Dark Oath Chieftain on foot, not the one that's mounted. He can be taken as an italics hero in the regiment of Chieftain on Warsteed or the War Queen. And then lastly, technically not an italics hero, but works the same way, Eternus can be taken by Bellucor instead of one of the first three above, because Bellucor can take those first three, the Centurion Marshal, Exalted Hero, Myrmidon, or he can take Eternus. Okay, War Master types. It doesn't literally mean that they have the War Master keyword, which only means that they have to be your general. But what I mean is that they can take every single unit in your army. So we have a number of them in Slaves of Darkness, which adds a lot of flexibility and increases the usefulness of these units. Abraxia, Archeon, Bellucor, the Demon Princes, and the two Gaunt Summoners can all take any... I said take all any, but I meant can all take any of your units, plus 0 to 1 of the italics heroes mentioned above. The restricted units, monsters, the Fomeroid, Spheranx, Mutilith, Vortex Beast, Slaughter Brute, and Soul Grinder can only be taken as 0 to 1 instance for many of the non-War Master type heroes. So, but if you want to take multiple monsters, you could take a Demon Prince and take 4 monsters with him if he's your general. So it can be done, but most of the heroes can only take 0 to 1. But honestly, considering how not great the monsters are, I don't know that you're really like hurting by taking 0 to 1. Then we've got a bunch of any and then unit type or unit name. Any Chaos Legionnaires can be taken by the Centurion Marshal or Eternus. Any Demon can be taken by Centurion Marshal or the Myrmidon. Any Warriors of Chaos can be taken by all heroes with Chaos in their name plus Eternus. Any Dark Oath can be taken by all Dark Oath heroes except Singri, who goes with Gunnar and is part of that like Warcry or whatever warband that is. And then any Furies are specific to Eternus. Douwe, is there anything you want to say about list building considering these restrictions? Has it really bitten you in the ass when you're trying to build a list, or have you found it pretty flexible, all things considered?
Well, I think it's really flexible. Like if you look at the War Master types, like for instance, Abraxia, Archeon, Be'lakor, or Demon Prince, these are for most people and most lists the go-to heroes, and they can bring any unit. So that gives a lot of flexibility. So it's not like really restricted as with other armies.
Yeah. I mean, what's an army you're playing right now, or at least list writing for, that does feel pretty restricted in comparison to slaves?
Skaven, for example. So
Okay.
if you look at the Skaven and you have like a Firmalord Deceiver or Death Master can only bring Clan Eshin, or a Warlock Engineer can only bring the Clan Scryer a bit. That's way more restricted.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to your list. We're finally here. We've basically said everything about this list, but let's go through it. So you called it one drop it like it's hot, and I tried to name the rest of the list a little bit in the spirit of your playful name there. You're in God's Wrath Warband, like we've been talking about. You've of course got the Slaves of Darkness lore, and you took Morbid Conjuration. Let's see. You got a Be'lakor. You got two blocks of 6 Varangard, both Mark of Khorne. You got a block of 5 Chaos Knights with Mark of Nurgle, and 6 Chaos Furies, probably to help you go take take the flanks or whatever, and just have a kind of chaffy, run around unit. I put there because you had so little in your army. It was a one drop to fit on this tiny little column. I decided to put the Chaos Furies, a snippet of their War Scroll here, so that we could just talk about them because it's the only one we haven't talked about. They got 12-inch move. Their attack profile is not all that great, but any combat phase, including that of your opponent, if it's in combat on a 3+, it can retreat as if it were your movement phase without any mortal damage. And that's instead of fighting implicitly, because any combat phase abilities have to happen before you fight. Now, it used to be that they could choose, instead of fighting, to retreat at the time that you would use one of their activations. Do you think this is better, that they... because this is a trade-off, right? I could see it being better in some situations because you're not giving up an activation to let them run away. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's because of the 3+, it's really dicey, and it used to be that you can just do it.
Yeah.
And just doing it is better, and it makes me think differently of the Furies. And now they're like, if you look at it, they're 1 health, and they used to be 2. So the problem with them now as well is that even if you want to go for the flanks or something else, a covering fire occasionally kills them. So their usage has become totally different now.
And the problem implicitly in your one-drop list is that everything's in your general's regiment, so you're giving them an easy battle tactic, right? If your Furies are shootable, let's say.
Yeah.
Has that been a problem, or has it made you have to keep them really far away from armies that could not snipe them?
Yeah, definitely. So it's not like I put them on the front row. It's more really always from border to border. And because they move 12, if you let them run and you if you auto run them or roll a bit higher, then they go quite far across the board, and occasionally as to give them quite of a bunny hop. When 6 Vanguard or the Chaos Knights charge into something, then you of course can charge the Furies with them, because most of the times the opponent will never like try and kill the Furies, but try to cripple the Knights or cripple the Vanguards before they strike. Then you can quite confidently just put them in, hope you roll the 3+, and make your extra move to already prepare for take their land, for example.
Yeah, okay. So I got a couple questions about this list. One is, you chose a list that's not only one drop, which has its pluses and minuses, which we can also talk about if you like, but also implicitly doesn't have access to an artifact or heroic trait. How much are you missing that in this list?
Not really, because as we've gone through it, like the Infernal Puppet would be the one artifact I would go to if I had to choose one, but it's not necessarily something that helps me every turn. It's a once per battle, and if the opponent casts some spells, and it shouldn't be enough to kill a wizard most of the time. And if you look at the heroic trait, the healing bit, it could be good. But then I would have to sacrifice the Chaos Knights, for example, for a Centurion, which can follow the rest. Then I'm missing my Chaos Knights Anvil block, my soaking unit. looking at the trade-off, I don't really miss it because yeah, now I have Chaos Knights instead of a Centurion. Um, yeah.
Okay. And then also one drop. I mean, has that been a problem for you? How much did you really need to have a one drop instead of two in this list?
Can you
Yeah.
repeat it?
Yeah. How often did you need it to be a one drop in your experience instead of a two drop? Could you have gotten away with a two drop and still been pretty good at determining the flow of the battle, or did you really need it to be a one drop, or is it more just a one drop because that's what you how such an elite list is?
Yeah, it's yeah, I used to play a little bit Archeon, for example, with the one drop in the last edition, and I'm really a fan of being a one drop, and especially in this edition because most armies can't even make a one drop,
Hmm.
and making you have the choice of turns can really, yeah, make you control the game from the start. Because some armies are built for getting first turn, some armies are built for getting second, and if you can control it and deny their preferred turn order, yeah, it helps a lot.
Okay, cool. And this is the one you took to the tournament this past weekend, right?
Yeah, correct.
Anything you want to add about the tournament? I know it's not a tournament report that we're doing, but is there anything you want to throw in about how this performed? You know?
Yeah, it was a fun tournament, and yeah, I went 2-1, and so the first two games I've won, and it's quite big as well, and that's where the one drop really helped a lot because yeah, being able to decide who starts helped in those. But the last match, and that was for the final spot, was a mirror match against another Be'lakor Vanguard list. So yeah, and that was a really crazy game built around counter charges and strike firsts, and the one who could get the strike first off won basically. So that's really yeah, really fun.
Nice. Okay, cool. So let's move on to your other list. I picked one of your other lists you sent me. You sent me three lists in total, actually, but I picked one that had a little more variance with the list we just looked at. So I called this three drop it like it's not a question mark, just to keep your name going there, because it's a three drop list. Also God's Wrath Warband, also Lord of the Damned, but now Primal Energy. Why Primal Energy here?
Also for the healing. So like to always have Emerald Lifestorm on the board to maximize on the healing bit, in combination that with the Sorcerer Lord on foot now, which has the Radiance of Dark Glory for also the healing, and try to yeah keep Be'lakor and Abraxia to a full.
Now, have you actually played this list yet?
Not yet. This is
Oh,
one of my lists to try and yeah to try out to see if Be'lakor and Abraxia in combination with some Vanguards help each other really well.
sure. So let's talk about it. You've got, if I look kind of horizontally here, you've only got 6 Varangard in total, which is half of what you had before, and they're both split into 3 units of 3. How much of an impact do you think that's going to make? I mean, obviously you've got other units. You got a bunch of chaff in the Chaos Warriors. We got 20 Chaos Warriors there. You got some Reptorics, which are basically replacing your Furies. Excuse me, and then the Sorcerer Lord plus Abraxia. How does that shifting things around like play out for you?
Yeah, because the last list was more of a Death Star with 2 of the 6 Vanguard blocks needed to do all the lifting. In this case, it's more yeah, like more minor damage, with Abraxia being a large beat stick, the Chaos Warriors being able to like tie stuff up, hopefully. Thus freeing the Vanguards, yeah, torpedoing, picking their opponents. So this is a bit more tricky movement-wise and picking your battles.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope it will work, but I have to test it out. But I do think that 1x6 Vanguards will be a bit better.
Hmm.
But yeah, one of the reasons I didn't do a 1x6 is that a lot of armies though have a lot of debuffs now. So pick a unit. Reduce the charge dice rolls by 1, so you can only make a 1d6 charge roll. No crits, minuses to hit, off movement, and I don't want my one big blob of 6 Vanguard to be crippled for the entire game.
That's fair enough. Is there a reason the Raptorics are in your General's Regiment instead of the like a Broxia Regiment? Because they're an easier target to kill, right, than the Chaos Warriors? Or do you feel like your Raptorics are going to stay further away and just never really engage, and therefore they're actually not as risky as the Chaos Warriors, even though the Chaos Warriors have Mark and Nurgle?
Yeah, well, like how I want to look at it is it's based on what I have to go up against. I'm feeling more and more for the -1 attack bodyguard rule. Like the
Ah,
three Vanguard want to go their own way, and the Raptorics have 2 wounds each, so that's 12 wounds, and they are supposed to bubble wrap Be'lakor a bit, since Be'lakor doesn't want to charge always, and his base is large enough for the Raptorics to be wholly within 6 inch of, and are fast enough to keep up with Be'lakor.
okay.
So yeah, it gives that kind of mobility. So when someone has an empty general's regiment, that I can just confidently use them as the -1 attack bodyguard, and don't cripple the Vanguard, so that they need to stay with Be'lakor as well.
Okay, interesting. I haven't seen a lot of people using the -1 hit rule, but or -1 attack rule. But I mean, that's it's interesting to hear your take on it. I've seen most people taking priority target at this point, but yeah, that's a topic for another day probably. Anything else you want to say about the list before we move on?
No, not necessarily. Yeah, although like the Chaos Warriors are 2 times 200 points, and looking at the Pterodons and your story, these are 200 points as well. And hearing your story, I think they could be better swapped for the Pterodons.
In terms of output, yes, but not in terms of tankiness. Obviously, the Chaos Warriors have 2 wounds apiece at 3-up save, so I could see an argument for them, right? For your Chaos Warriors.
Yeah, 1 times 10 Chaos Warriors and 1 times the 3 Pterodons.
Yeah.
Their usage should not be necessarily on the front row, but to babysit the objectives.
Yeah.
And depending how the game shifts, they could open up or move across the board.
Yeah.
And then that's where Pterodons will be more handy, perhaps.
Okay, well, speaking of Pterodons, let's take a look at my list. I said, "Oh, Groid, you don't," which I have to say it out loud like that. Because it's Ogroid and Dawn, as in Therodon and Myrmidon, for anyone that missed my dad joke. Anyway, all right, so God's Wrath Warband once against Lord of the Dam and Morbid Conjuration, no surprise. I've only got 2 regiments here. I got Be'lakor. We've already basically talked about all the mechanics. I got a unit of 6 Therodons. All of my units that could take marks have Nurgle. So Therodons got it. Ogroid Myrmidon as an Italics hero. Then I've got a second regiment with the Demon Prince Wings. I go Wings every time. I think the other one's not as good as it used to be. He's also got Nurgle because he can't give a mark of Chaos unless he has the same mark as the rest of the army, and the rest of the army wants to be Nurgle anyway, so why not? I gave him Radiance of Dark Glory, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the same one you picked.
That's the healing.
Yes, the healing, which is great for an army like this, which is a little softer, squishier, and then Conqueror's Crown is the minus. I might be convinced of the magic one that you said now, the once per game, but this is I figured I'm going to have a hard time with objective control with a list like this because I just don't have a whole lot of bodies. And so I felt like maybe the Therodons like going into infantry anyway, so I thought maybe subtracting 5 could be a thing. But anyway, and then another block of 6, another Ogre and Myrmidon, and so I've got basically packs. Be'lakor goes with one set, and the Demon Prince goes with the other. And you got a Myrmidon with both. And then I got a unit of Chaos Furies to go, take the flanks and whatever. And I also thought maybe Be'lakor would be a take the flanker for early on in the game and then come back to the middle to help out when it was time to get in the middle of the fray. So, that's kind of the idea. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, it looks good, and I think using the Demon Prince to trigger Eye of the Gods early on is really helpful. And depending on what you roll, it can create a more aggressive Ogroid bit as well. I think it's really good, and I think if you use this with the counter charge strike first combination, it can be quite deadly.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought a whole lot about the spell lore. I only have 2 casts in this. Honestly, as much as people talk about the endless spells, I actually think this list just wants to get its own spells off, really.
Yeah.
I don't think it. I think our lore is good enough that we don't need the morbid conjuration if I'm limited to what I've got. So getting a 3d6 charge and getting a what was the other one? Strike last to an opponent's unit is pretty strong. So just stick with those.
Yeah.
But I was actually talking to our buddy Hugo, who anyone that's keeping up with these reviews of the indexes did our Zinch review, our last one. Hugo is going to evidently, hopefully he doesn't change his mind, he probably won't because this is not spike enough, but he said he'd be able to trade with me to get the right amount of Theridons that I need to complete my list, so I'm pretty looking forward to it. And I've got a Zinch. Yeah, and I've got a Zinch. Back when I was playing Guild of Summoners, I bought a Magnus the Red model and converted him to kind of like a Lord of Change. But I never got to use him, and you can't. I've got four fucking birds at this point, and you can't really do that anymore. So now I'm going to use my big Magnus model that's converted to be my Bellicor now because he's on the same base, I think. And then I'll have a little bit of a demon Zinchi thing still going on, but then have my Theridons being all nurgly. I'm actually really looking forward to this list. So it's definitely it's a me list. I think its weakest problem is its speed, and its second weakest problem is its defense, but at the same time, I think it might do more than everyone would expect, and if it gets everything off, and not everything off, even if it's on its base profile, but it gets to fight first, it actually can wipe a lot of things that people would never be expecting. So, pretty excited about it. We'll see. Anyway, so Douwe, let's move on to. Oh, there's the Demon Prince profile. Sorry for those. I meant to show that. In case you didn't know what a Demon Prince did, he's 10 wounds, 3 plus save. He's 8-inch move, but goes to 10 with the wings. And then he's got that ability to give Mark of the Eye of the Gods to a unit on a 3-up, which is pretty great. Yep. Okay, so this is it, Douwe. You did it. You're first. We finally got you on here. We've been talking for a while of getting you on here talking about being coach for the Dutch team, but we can do that again if we can make the time. But you're now our Slaves to Darkness guy, so you're welcome anytime you want, and for whatever else you want to talk about. But anyway,
great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We got a couple of closing thoughts here. Internal and external balance, impact on the meta, closing thoughts. You can wrap that all into one big thing if you want. What are your thoughts? I mean, it might be too early to say what the meta is or what it's going to be 3 months from now, but what are we thinking? Internal balance, how are you feeling? You feel like Slaves? It sounds like you don't think it's got good internal balance because you only really seem to be focused on a few units. But am I wrong about that? Do you feel like the whole book's got legs?
You mentioned it. I don't feel like the balance internally is done quite properly because you basically see a lot of the Vanguard, Chaos Knights, Bellicor. Those 3 units you see in every list, and the rest is a bit of sort of fluff. Like you pick your own, but these 3 units need to be in them. So I think that could be could be improved upon. Hopefully with the new battle tone. Yeah, and if you look at the external balance, like how they fit in the meta, they're doing quite well, but not too well that they're overpowered. They also have their bad matchups and tough matchups, but also matchups that are really favorable. Like for instance, with the strike first against a lot of combat armies. Of course, you have to roll the 4-up, but those are the fun matches. In a round you roll the 4-up, the next round you don't roll it, and then you roll it again. So I feel it's quite in a good place looking at the rest of the armies and the meta.
Okay. Go for it. Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a fun army. It has become more dynamic than it was in the last edition. They only need to give a bit more love to the other units, and I think that if we look at more of a combination list, also looking at the Dark Oak for the recursion, some Ogroids, and the Vanguard Bellicor combo, you can create kind of good lists that do better on some battle plans and get more battle tactics, because that's something that's difficult to do with the current elite go, which most people go to.
Yeah, honestly, I've been teetering on the brink of playing slaves for a long time, and the reason I actually have more than 3,000 points of slaves is just because you used to be able to, I'm a coalition allies kind of guy, and back when you, especially second edition, had a lot of flexibility with using that stuff in your Zinch army. For me, I'm a Zinch player. That's why I collected them. I actually have 6 Varangard. I have a lot of the stuff, and unfortunately, I never really got a chance to use them quite like I wanted to. And then I've never been a huge fan of like the like metal 80s metal like aesthetic. That's just my thing. But obviously there's something about this army that speaks to me, and I'm actually more excited. It's in my top 4 armies that I want to play right now in 4th edition, which is saying something because I have 13 armies at this point. So, and this is not one of them. So it's now like number 14, I guess. I think it's a cool, I think there's still a lot of toolkit inside the army that isn't being tapped just yet because the stuff that's obviously good is obviously good. And, I don't know. I'm pretty psyched about it. I mean, it's good to come join the club finally and get to use my models before instead of selling them off to someone. So, anyway, let's move on to that last slide there with a little dark oath, maybe to come. Douwe, again, thank you so much for being a part of this. I always knew you'd be a good guest, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. You're always welcome for all the other armies you want to talk about. And maybe we'll do a Skaven video sometime soon if you're really feeling Skaven-y. You and I keep coming back to each other on like little random discussions about how great Skaven is. So you're more than welcome.
Yeah, definitely.
Hopefully you had a good time too. And if anyone wants to hit you up, is there any way that you prefer, like comment section of this video in the Discord? Is there any other way that you'd like people to hit you up if you're feeling like it?
Yeah, it could be like indeed in the comment section or mostly in the comment section, I think.
Cool. Okay. And we're looking
in the Slaves group.
Yeah, okay, cool. In the slaves group. Okay. So anyway, Douwe, thank you so much. Everyone back home or just listening, thank you so much for keeping up with us. Sorry we've been low on content lately, but hopefully this makes up for it a bit. I know Jonas has got some stuff planned. I've got, like I said, a series of literally looking at every shooting unit in the game. Not going to talk about every single one, but I'll have taken every single one into consideration when talking about it. My main kind of philosophy in us talking about content right now is I don't want to talk about things until I have some experience with it, or I can talk to someone that has. And that's kind of the bottom line there. I don't want to start theory crafting and be just another channel out there that's just throwing out random things out of what I think makes sense. I'm happy to write a meme list in the middle of someone else who's actually played a tournament talking about it like we did here. So that's why the content's coming out a little more slowly than we'd like. But I hope you guys can, get on board with that. And, we'll get some more great content coming out sooner than later, plus Math Hammer stuff, plus whatever else. Let us know in the comments down below what you liked about this one. Did we miss anything you really think was important that needed to be said? Well, obviously, we couldn't cover every unit. And thanks again to Douwe, and we'll catch you guys next time. Ryan out.